The protagonist carefully picks up a piece of tasty meat with chopsticks and dips it into the sauce with the same trepidation. He brings the food to his mouth and takes the first bite. Tasting the dish, an elderly man chews the meat in his mouth thoroughly and says that it is delicious. The man looks thoughtfully ahead. He is kneeling in front of a bowl of freshly cooked food. It is still steaming. Not far from the protagonist lies a defeated dragon with its eyes rolled back and its mouth open. Suddenly, someone approaches the man who is eating and addresses him as Rushel. The man looks at the person who called him in surprise. Noticing him, the magical animal comes even closer to him and asks the man what he is going to do next. The protagonist looks at him with bewilderment in his eyes. The animal says that he has defeated a very large dragon and looks at the defeated enemy lying nearby. He pensively assumes that his father will finally acknowledge him. The old man turns his head up and looks at the sky in confusion. He remembers his father and is immersed in memories that took place 70 years ago. Before his eyes appears a large and very beautiful house, over which large black clouds have gathered. It is raining heavily. An adult man stands on the threshold of the house and is about to enter it. A little boy in an apron runs out into the street to meet him with a ready meal in his hands. The boy greets his father with a smile on his face and looks at him with admiration, handing him a tray with food and saying that he has made a pie. The boy wants his father to try his dish. However, the protagonist's father suddenly makes a sharp downward movement with his hand, thereby knocking the boy's dish out of his hands. Rushel is very surprised by his father's behavior. The man tramples his pie. The protagonist's father, dressed in beautiful armor, looks down at him with a piercing and cold gaze. He asks his son what he is doing and is interested in the reason why he does not practice with the ball or train in the mountains. Rushel presses his hands to his chest and is at a loss for words in front of his father, not knowing what to say and stuttering a little. An older man next to him stands up for him and says that Rushel's health has deteriorated, and that is why he allowed him to take the day off. Suddenly, the protagonist's father hits the elderly man who stood up for Rushel in the face with all his might. He flies into the wall with all his might and breaks through it, creating a hole in the wall with his body. The man asks him with cruelty in his voice why he gives him a day off when he is the head of the family. The main character thinks to himself about his grandfather with surprise, worrying about him. Then the man, turning his head to the side, addresses the woman who is holding a small child in her arms and standing not far from them. He calls her Ristina and says that this concerns her too. The woman is surprised. He says that as his mother she should discipline him. Ristina is afraid of her husband and his words towards her. The woman hugs her small child more and more and tries to argue with him, saying that she did not give birth to him. She looks at the man and says with uncertainty and fear in her voice that for Stru, he is the only relative. He walks towards her with clearly bad intentions. The woman shakes with fear, and her child even starts to cry. Suddenly, the protagonist himself stands between Ristina and the protagonist's father. With a determined face, he blocks the father's path to the adoptive mother. The woman looks at him in surprise, and the small child clings to her chest, crying. The protagonist asks his father to stop with fear in his eyes because they are not guilty of anything. Rushel is forced to admit his guilt. The man asks him again with surprise whether it is his fault. He looks at his son emotionlessly and orders him to take the sword, and also says that it is time for a lesson. The protagonist is very scared and looks up at his father with confusion. His father is Yarmhof Tristan, the strongest swordsman in the world, the bearer of the title of the Holy Sword. He is the father of the protagonist. The man looks at his opponent and with a quick and sharp movement attacks him with his sword. Rushel manages to dodge his attack, causing his father to take the brunt of his blow on the trees behind him. He looks at Yaruma with determination and thinks about how he is Rushelhof Tristan, and how he has practiced with his sword day after day as his son. The protagonist, making great efforts, tries to repel the hail of attacks that hit him with renewed force. He covers one eye due to the strong pressure of his father. Rushel learned not only how to wield a sword, the main character saw memories of a little boy sitting and reading many different books. His father taught him how to be a sword saint, hammering a bunch of knowledge into his head. Rushel learned everything that ordinary people learn in 20 years of their life. They continued to exchange new blows. Rushel again remembered how he lit a fire in the forest. He always worked as hard as he could at the age of 8. His father strikes, but the protagonist jumps up, moving out of the line of attack. Harem looks at his son with anger and hatred. Rushel swings at his father from above with fury and determination. However, before he can deliver a blow, he falls to the ground in front of Yaris's feet. The protagonist closes his eyes and coughs up blood. He cannot catch his breath or come to his senses in order to continue sparring with his father. His body was affected by an unknown disease. The main character, who is still trying to get up with all his might, is approached by his father. Rushel tries to reach him and calls his father. Instead of helping his son get up and feeling sorry for him, Harem swings his sword sharply and without any emotion attacks Rushel, hitting his target and sending him flying back. The man stands still and says that there was still hope in him, that he would become stronger with age. But his son is getting weaker with each passing year. Rushel's sword lies at his feet, and he himself lies a little further away from his father. The head of the family looks at his son with an indifferent look and rudely says that it was immediately clear that a second-rate mother would only produce a second-rate son. He also blames Lena and says that she gave birth to a defective child. Harem turns around, walking in the opposite direction from the protagonist, who is unable to stand up. He tells the boy in the same cold-blooded voice that he is no longer his son. Rushel is dirty and all covered in mud, and raindrops are falling on him from above. He looks at the sky with indifference and thinks about his mother and how she died almost immediately after his birth. He imagines her image and the care and tenderness with which she holds him little in her arms and his head. Rushel silently asks her for forgiveness, for the fact that he is weak even though she gave him life. With his last remaining strength, out of anger at himself, the protagonist squeezes the earth and dirt under his gloves with his right hand. He, thinking that his body is too weak, apologizes to her once again. After some time, very slowly, Rushel regains consciousness in a room on a soft and warm bed. He is perplexed and looks thoughtfully at the ceiling in front of him. Suddenly, the woman sitting next to him with a slight smile on her face looks at him and is happy that he woke up. The wife of the protagonist's father says that the healing magic helped. Rushel looks at her in surprise. The boy looks at her and with a little hesitation calls the woman Mama Ristina, and with surprise in his voice, asks her if she took care of him. The main character thanks her. The woman guesses that he must be in a very difficult situation because no one can withstand his attacks. The main character rises and, agreeing with her, also notes that he has had an attack. The woman, with a sly and evil smile on her face, agrees with him and again makes the assumption that he must be in a lot of pain, and then calls it the dragon's curse. Ristina places her left hand on her chest, and with a superior and arrogant look in her eyes, explains to the boy that the dragon's curse is the name of the curse she placed on him and Lena. With all the suddenness, the woman puts her hands on the protagonist's shoulders and presses him hard to the pillow. The protagonist himself opens his mouth in surprise and closes one eye, looking at his adoptive mother in surprise. Ristina sits on Rushel and says with glee that finally this day has come, and he has given up the boy. The woman also says that now Sturm will become the next sword saint. Rushel is very surprised by her behavior. Ristina looks down at the protagonist with a very scary expression on her face and says, with a terrible madness in her eyes, that she can finally be the mother of the holy sword. The protagonist looks at the woman in front of him with surprise and disbelief in his eyes. He opens his mouth in surprise and realizes that this woman cursed his mother and he has it for this reason. Rushel frowns and grinds his teeth, looking angrily at his adoptive mother. Tears start to flow in the protagonist's eyes, and he begins to think about his mother and her life. The woman in front of him laughs at his tears. She calls him by name and with anger and malice in her voice tells him that he should worry more about himself and not about his dead mother. Ristina, still sitting on top of the main character, tells him that Rushel will be banished and thrown into the mountains where monsters live. He looks at her with fear. The boy, perplexed, asks her again about the mountains. The woman looks at him with a malicious look and explains with a terrible grin on her face that his father ordered it. The main character opens his eyes and mouth in disbelief. He asks her again, remembering his father. A cruel grin appears on the woman's face, and she begins to laugh. Ristina places her hands on the boy's neck, who has no strength to resist her. The protagonist tries to resist the woman. His adoptive mother begins to strangle him, and at the same time explain to him that she cursed his mother before he was born. The woman says that he should not have been born at all. The protagonist is shaking. The woman, with all possible hatred and a cruel smile on her face, tells him that it would be too boring if his life were to end now. She wishes for the protagonist to be eaten by monsters, and for his cries of complete disappointment to be heard in the mountains. The woman stops strangling the protagonist and throws her head back, taking out her tongue in pleasure from the situation. She laughs terribly, not looking at the boy, and he looks at her with panic and surprise. The protagonist looks up at his adoptive laughing mother and thinks that there is nothing human in her cruel laughter. The boy compares her to a disgusting demon in human form. The protagonist looks at her with fear and realizes that with each bag she holds, his vision is increasingly clouded by magic. His consciousness gradually leaves him and eventually he closes his eyes. The protagonist suddenly regains consciousness. He slowly opens his eyes and looks forward. Rushel rises, leaning on both his hands, and looks at the trees that surround him on all sides. The protagonist looks at the beautiful landscape around him with disbelief in his eyes, and silently. He is surprised to realize that he is woken up. Rushel, who had been lying on the grass, decides to get up and stand on his feet. He raises his head in disbelief, looking at the sky, and notices birds flying in the sky above him. The protagonist opens his mouth in surprise, watching their flight. The boy understands that he is in an unknown forest. Rushel walks through the forest, where many different bushes and trees grow. The main character looks around and leans on the trees. He explores the forest with surprise. The boy finds a butterfly and uses the index and middle fingers of his right hand to clamp its wings, preventing it from flying away. After a while, the protagonist moves on, releasing the butterflies to freedom. Rushel explores the forest and, looking around at the different trees, makes a guess to himself that this is a teleportation spell that sent him to some forest. The boy also thinks that he needs to set up camp before nightfall. He walks through the forest for a short time and comes to a clearing where there are no trees. He decides that this is a suitable place for a camp, but he needs something else. The boy is trying to find something in the grass and bushes near the campsite. He opens his mouth in surprise, holding a pine cone in his hand, and looks at it with admiration in his eyes, happy that he came across a Bachlan pine cone. The main character thinks to himself that the resin inside these cones ignites very well. If you beat them against each other, you can create a spark. The boy diligently knocks the cones and, having thrown in a few small branches, blows on the fire to light it. Little Rushel is sitting near the fire, with his legs tucked under him. To his left is a stack of brushwood for starting a fire. The protagonist thinks that his father really did abandon him. He is saddened by the fact that he will no longer be able to return home. Rushel looks at the flame and frowns slightly. Tears of resentment well up in his eyes, but he quickly wipes them away with a sharp movement of his right hand, not letting them roll down his cheeks. The boy stands up with determination and, throwing his head back, looks at the sky. He stops himself and thinks that now he should think about how to survive in the mountains. Suddenly, he feels something. The boy is surprised and only manages to put his right hand to his mouth, but the blood seeps through even it, rolling down his hand in a trickle. The boy falls to the ground in unbearable pain. He wonders why the attack happened right now and coughs up blood, trying to cover it with his left hand. He breathes heavily and rakes dirt with his right hand. The protagonist says, through pain, that he is in great pain. Tears start to appear in his eyes. Rushel feels his whole body burning, and the boy thinks to himself that the pain and fever are stronger than usual. Rushel thinks he's going to die. His stomach rumbles greedily, and he puts his hand to it, spreading his fingers. Blood flows from his mouth, trickling down his chin. The boy squints his eyes as hard as he can and lies down in the fetal position, covering his stomach with his arms and legs. He thinks that this hunger is unbearable, and he needs to eat at least something. The main character laughs ironically at himself with the last of his remaining strength and reaches forward with a weak smile, thinking that even in such a situation he wants to eat. The protagonist is still reaching forward, crawling on the dirty ground and putting his right hand forward. There is something liquid in front of him, like water. He feels it with his hands. He doesn't understand what it is and wonders, but in a semi-conscious state, he notices something that he felt, soft and cool. Rushel tears off part of the product and thinks that he doesn't care anymore. He holds an unfamiliar object in his hand and moves it closer to his mouth, and his mouth opens, then takes the first bite and his eyes open in surprise. He blushes a little. The protagonist looks at what he just ate with eyes full of admiration and thinks that it is very sweet. His mouth waters with appetite and his face turns red. Rushel quickly begins to absorb the tasty delicacy. He thinks that there is also a slight bitter aftertaste, but it is pleasant to eat. Enjoying the taste, the protagonist closes his eyes with a new bite. The boy thinks of the cool and refreshing taste and compares the new treat he just encountered to jelly. He puts the last piece in his mouth and swallows it with pleasure. Rushel falls on his back to the ground and breathes out with relief. The protagonist, smiling, spreads his arms and legs in different directions and closes his eyes with pleasure. He thinks that it was very tasty. Suddenly, he realizes something and opens his eyes in surprise. The boy quickly assumes a sitting position and looks at his hands, bewilderedly saying that the attack has stopped. Suddenly, he turns his head to the right and moves his gaze from his hands to his new treat that saved him from the attack. The boy wonders in bewilderment what he ate. A slime appears before Rushel's eyes. He notices it and looks down at the little monster. The boy is very surprised and exclaims in surprise. He calls it madness and cannot believe that he ate slime. The main character looks menacingly at the slime and is silent, and then with a sharp movement of his hand he pinches off a new piece of it, and also quickly takes a bite, swallowing it. He again breaks into a satisfied smile and squints his eyes. Thinking that it is very sweet, the boy thinks that this is very strange. He puts his right hand to his chin, remembering that no book indicated that slime was edible, and no monsters in principle. In front of him lies a bitten slime. He takes a stick lying nearby and with a sharp movement hits the slime, hitting the core, thanks to which the monster exists in principle. It starts to crack from the hard contact with the stick. Suddenly, the slime lying on the grass begins to slowly disintegrate and disappear. When it completely disappears, the ball inside it jumps, bouncing off the surface. The protagonist looks at it in surprise and then takes it in his hands, squeezing it between the thumb and index finger of his right hand. Rushel looks at it in bewilderment and says that it really has disappeared. He remembers that the monster consists of a magical core, which is its heart. In the boy's head, a picture of slime appears. Rushel understands that everything else is the outer shell of the monster. If the core is destroyed, the monster will disappear, and if the shell is damaged too much, the monster will disappear too. He imagines all this in his head, and thinks that this is why everyone thought it was impossible to eat the flesh of monsters. The protagonist looks at the cracked kernel that lies on the palm of his right hand, and thinks with determination that if he carefully tears off the pieces, he will be able to eat them. He enthusiastically squeezes the kernel. The next day, he sharpens the stone by mechanically striking it against another stone. The boy ties this stone to a thick stick with simple knots. Eventually, he achieves that. He has made a simple axe. The boy puts his left hand on his side and, with a stern look, examines the weapon he has just made, which he holds in front of him with his right hand. The main character slowly wanders through the forest, in which there are many different trees and bushes. Unexpectedly, in his search, he discovers a small river. The guy drinks water from it, scooping up the liquid in his hands. Rushel wipes her mouth with her right hand from the drops of water left after drinking, and looking somewhere far into the distance, she thinks about how she will hunt today, and also look for edible monsters. Suddenly, he notices a slime next to him, and looks at it. He aims with his hand movements to better attack his opponent, and eventually, he grabs some of the slime with sharp lunges of his hands. Rushel holds the torn pieces of the defeated slime in his right hand, and holds another piece to his mouth with his left hand to taste it. The boy looks at the monster, who lies all bitten up not far from him. He thinks to himself that the easiest monster he can eat is slime, and that way he can curb his hunger. However, he realizes that he needs something other than sweetness. His stomach rumbles in discontent, and he grabs it with his right hand, expressing his annoyance. The protagonist picks up an axe and thinks that he is going hunting anyway. The boy looks at the tree in front of him and grabs its trunk with his hand. He chops down a young tree with a mechanical movement using a homemade axe. When he finishes his work, Rushel begins to scrape the tree trunk with a stone, thereby wanting to obtain a thin material for making rope. He raises the new weapon in front of him with joy in his eyes, and looks with enthusiasm at the bow that he just made with his own hands. Rushel is happy that the bow is ready and touches its bowstring a little. Now he needs to make arrows from branches and bird feathers. He makes a couple of arrows and thinks that this is enough. After that, He sits down in the numerous bushes and thinks that he needs to wait for prey. The main character waits in ambush for a long time in front of a beautiful river from which he recently drank water and thinks that at any moment the enemy may appear. However, after some time, no one comes. Suddenly, the main character, with surprise in his eyes, notices a doe with a fawn in front of him. He rejoices at his future prey. The mother bends her head to the river and begins to drink water. Rushel tries to aim his bow as best as possible and is about to shoot the animal, but is surprised to suddenly notice something and stops. The doe also notices the same thing, and while her baby is drinking from the pond, she suddenly rushes away, trying to dodge the attack, but someone's claws grab her by the flesh. The protagonist looks up and opens his mouth in surprise as he sees a large bird using its claws to carry the animal up into the air. A small child watches from the ground. Rushel realizes that it is a black raven and watches the predator leave. He thinks that these monsters not only carry off deer, but also tigers. The boy takes the bow in his hands and aims, thinking that now he will become prey. The boy quickly releases an arrow from his homemade bow. The attack hits the target and wounds a large black bird. It caws in pain and surprise and releases the deer from its claws. The protagonist coated the tips with the juice of the tilkovy grass, and as a result, a paralyzing poison was obtained. The boy watches as the bird stops and releases its prey from the ground. He hopes that everything worked. Suddenly, a black raven gradually closes your eyes and begins to caw loudly. The large bird slowly falls down. The boy opens his mouth in delight and widens his eyes, exclaiming with joy. After some time, the main character makes his way through the forest and finally finds the bird he had defeated some time ago, which lies on the ground and continues to croak. The boy makes a small fire and, standing next to the defeated bird, which has finally fallen silent, thinks that his hunt was successful. But now he has a problem. The boy looks at his enemy with tension on his face and thinks that he knows how to cook the bird because he learned to cook it, but it will carry damage to his body. He understands that if the damage is too severe, the entire raven could disappear, which means he needs to do all this while he is still alive. Rushel hesitantly picks up the axe. The bird with open eyes looks at the boy. The protagonist begins to peer into her gaze. He looks back at her with a contradiction in his soul, which is reflected in his gaze, and frowns. Rushel, with determination, blindfolds her with a thick rope in several layers and tightens a strong knot. He asks the monster for forgiveness. The protagonist begins to gradually pull out the black feathers of the bird. The boy thinks that guilt is normal. He takes the axe in his hands and, looking at his prey, says that he is truly sorry. Rushel begins to cut the monster's flesh. The protagonist thinks that he needs to eat it, or else he will have no future. The boy frowns, and tears well up in his eyes from the feeling of guilt before his prey. Rushel puts in all his efforts and tries for a long time, simultaneously sighing heavily due to fatigue and stress. The main character finally finishes the work and looks at his result. The boy holds a piece of the monster he defeated earlier in front of him. Rushel, with surprise on his face, is happy that he succeeded and was able to get the fillet. He pushes the fillet aside and looks with some disappointment at the cracked core left by the stricken black raven. The boy notes that this is all the raven could stand. Rushel, with a joyful smile on his face, places a piece of meat on the ground in front of him and says that the feathers and meat he got from it are still here, and also thanks the monster for this. The boy looks with admiration at the fillet lying on the ground and tries to cover his eyes with his hand from the glow that seems to be coming from the meat. He says that this meat is very beautiful and compares it to amethyst. The protagonist wonders if this meat is edible and thoughtfully rests his left hand on his chin, looking at the fillet. He thinks that the grass is harmless to people, but he is more concerned about the meat itself. The guy realizes that he learned that slime is edible by accident. Suddenly, he notices something in front of him and looks in surprise. In front of him appear two deer that he had seen before near the river. Rushel cuts off a small piece of meat and throws it towards the animals. He thinks that the deer sometimes eat meat. Part of the fillet falls in front of the deer, and they begin to sniff out the food the boy gave them. The animal starts chewing the meat and nothing happens to it. The deer go back into the forest, and the boy turns around and concludes that the meat is edible after all. First, he seasons it with rock salt he found near a stream. Then he puts a couple of pieces of meat on a homemade skewer and roasts them over a fire he recently made. The main character gets delicious fried meat. He looks at his culinary masterpiece with admiration and is already drooling over the freshly cooked meat. Rushel tremblingly brings the skewer to his mouth and, with his eyes closed in delight, takes his first bite. The protagonist slowly chews the fried meat and immediately breaks into a smile, thinking that it is very tasty. It's so elastic it seems to resist when he eats it. The boy also notes that the meat is very juicy. Rushel swallows another piece and thinks that it melts in his mouth and is much more tender and juicy than chicken. The main character closes one eye and throws more and more pieces of fried meat into his mouth with pleasure. He got so carried away with the meat that he even forgot that it belonged to a monster. The boy falls to the ground with a tired sigh, his mouth wide open. He spreads his arms and legs to the sides and notices with pleasure that he has eaten his fill and that he hasn't stuffed his belly like this for a long time. Skewers lie next to him. The protagonist thinks that he hasn't had an attack all day and now he can sleep for hours. Suddenly he hears a voice that tells him that he has gained night vision. The boy jumps up in surprise and opens his mouth in surprise, exclaiming in surprise and wondering. The protagonist opens his eyes wide and looks ahead, towards the forest. He arrives in great bewilderment, looking at the trees and noticing that he sees everything very clearly. Rushel touches his eyes with his right hand and, not believing it, thinks that this is his skill. The boy remembers that skills are special abilities that are different from magic. They all enhance a person's physical abilities. They can be obtained through rigorous training as well as through trials in the church. Rushel continues to look at the trees and bushes in front of him with surprise. He thinks about it, considering it strange because he is not trained. Suddenly his eyes widen, suggesting something in his head. The protagonist is perplexed and looks at his hands. The boy confidently assumes that this happened because he ate the monster. It's possible because he heard that there are edible herbs that improve the skill. He assumes that the same thing works with monsters. The boy understands that a strong body means that he can survive here. He clenches his fist tightly and thinks that with a healthy body, maybe his father will be able to accept him. Rushel lifts his head up and tells him that he needs to move forward. Thus began his exploration of monsters and survival in the mountains. A beautiful forest and mountains around it. A hole is visible in one of the trees. The main character uses a stone to draw a couple of stripes and then crosses them out on the wood. It's been a year since he came here. Rushel still holds that very stone in his hands and yawns deeply, covering his mouth with his left hand. He's managed to survive so far. He lives in a forgotten hollow of a wood-boring bat. The boy spreads a carpet under his feet. It is a safe place where they go. Monsters and wild animals because the smell of the bat still remains. The main character looks away and thinks that over the course of this year, he has gotten used to life here, was able to make a bunch of different tools for survival, and for now he is alive and not complaining. The attacks stop when Rushel eats the slime and suggests that maybe one day he will be able to lift the curse forever. The protagonist looks around the room and looks at the pile of food. He places the plate on the table in front of him. Today for breakfast, he has the remains of fried fish and quail eggs, as well as wild vegetables that grow near the water. Rushel takes the fish that is impaled on a skewer in his right hand and brings it to his nose, inhaling the smell of fried fish that he will now eat. He is alive and well and has an abundance of good food. However, all this is starting to bore him. The boy eats his breakfast with disappointment on his face. No matter how tasty the food is, even it starts to bore you when you only eat fried food all the time. He pulls his legs up to himself and clasps his head in his hands, burying it in his knees. The boy thinks that if he had a pot, he would be able to cook a variety of dishes. He gives the example of a stew, so he tries to make himself pots or pans, but he couldn't do anything with the fireproof leaves and nothing came out of the clay. The protagonist recalls his previous unsuccessful attempts. Rushel thinks that he has one last option left, and sadly tilts his head to the side, crossing his arms. Suddenly, he hears a strange sound outside his home and, wanting to know what it is, carefully looks out of the hollow. The boy looks down and turns his attention to the animal below. The protagonist watches the ant with surprise, which makes strange sounds. Rushel thinks to himself that this is an iron ant. The guild has given this monster an E rank. The boy is the size of a large dog, and his chitin is as strong as steel. He believes that this is a dangerous opponent that is difficult to deal cutting damage to. The main character continues to carefully look out of his house, looking down. He thinks that the monster is alone here, which means he is a scout, and if there is a scout here, then the ants want to move the anthill. The boy understands that if they move the anthill here, he will not be able to live here, and grabs a nearby weapon. He pulls out a stick with a sharpened end in front of him and apologizes to the monster, saying that he needs to get rid of it. The protagonist steps forward and, holding his homemade weapon above his head, jumps out of his house, smiling, as he says that he has been looking for this ant for a long time. The boy lands on his feet near the monster, who notices him. Rushel yells at the iron ant to look at him and hits a nearby tree with a stick. The monster looks at him angrily. The ant is rapidly approaching him. The boy starts to run away, realizing that the ant is about to attack him. He shouts that the monster is too slow, but it continues to pursue him. The main character has been running up and down the mountain for a year now. He's become faster and stronger, and has also collected all the useful magical herbs. Thanks to them, he increases his running speed. The boy turns around, looking at the monster behind him, and remembering the plant he ate earlier, he thinks about how bitter the grass was. Suddenly, his foot trips. He loses his balance and falls to the ground, screaming loudly in surprise. The monster behind him continues to run towards him. A moment later, it jumps on him, preparing to attack. Rushel first looks at the enemy with fear in his eyes, and then decisively exclaims and jumps to the side, leaving the line of attack of the monster. The protagonist lands on one of the tree branches and grabs the rope. He pulls the rope down, saying that now is the time, and jumps to the ground, still holding the rope. The ant falls right into the boy's trap and ends up in a homemade bag. The main character calmly lands on his feet and, looking at his defeated enemy, is glad that he was caught. The iron ant tries to get out and continues to make strange sounds. The boy approaches the trap and says that this is the web of a forest spider, a D-rank monster, and that it won't bite through it so easily. Memories of this monster pop up in his head. The ant is still trying to get out of the trap. The main character also shows his spear and says that it is made of the horn of a homogeneous beaver and can even pierce steel. Now he remembers this monster. He smears chilcoki grass on the end of his homemade spear so that it can paralyze him, and with a quick lunge delivers a stabbing blow to the unarmed enemy, exhaling lightly. He lowers his weapon and, looking at the enemy, waits for the herb to take effect. After a while, the iron ant stops making sounds and Rushel reaches into the bag, saying that everything worked well. To gather what he needs, he wants to use a knife made from the teeth of a toothy mouse. The boy closes his eyes and apologizes, saying that it will be over quickly. A year has passed, but he still feels guilty when he does this. He plunges the knife all the way in, and with a look of concentration on his face, says that if he damages him too much, he will disappear. He has to do everything quickly and carefully. Rushel smiles slightly as he starts to succeed. Finds herself a bees and not minute. For one says that it can be used as a pot. He wants to take the rest of the parts because iron is useful. You can also take his oil, which he secretes from his mouth. The protagonist, with uncertainty and pity in his eyes, says that it is time to say goodbye. He wants to end the suffering of the iron ant, and with a quick movement strikes with a knife. The monster disappears, leaving behind only a cracked ball. Rushel folds her hands in a grateful gesture and closes her eyes, expressing her gratitude to the ant. After a while, he takes the bowl he recently made and says it's time to try it out. Rushel scoops up water from the stream and makes a small fire. He holds the new container over the fire, watching the water in the container. Suddenly, he is surprised to see a couple of bubbles appear on the surface of the water. The boy looks at the boiling water with admiration in his eyes. He exclaims loudly and joyfully, raising his hands up. He is happy that nothing is leaking or breaking. The boy lifts the pot up and says, with joy in his voice, that the pot ascends with joy in his voice, that the pot has been received. Now he can cook what he wanted for so long. In his head, he imagines many different dishes that he can eat. The main character is happy and says enthusiastically that now he can cook a stew. The protagonist says that he already has what he wants to cook and reaches into his bag for something. He takes something out of it and reveals an object previously wrapped in grass leaves. It turns out to be baby boar meat. Baby boars are E-rank monsters that resemble normal boars. They are essentially B-rank monsters that have not yet grown up. Giant boars. At the same time, Rushel imagines the monsters in her head and herself in comparison to them. Often, baby boars walk close to giant boars, so they are difficult to get. However, thanks to a trap that the boy said, he managed to catch one in a net. The protagonist takes out a knife and says it's time to cook with a smile on his face. He has already prepared the meat in advance and seasoned it with salt. First, he is going to cut the meat into cubes. Then he puts them in boiling water for a few minutes to get rid of the smell and excess fat. After a while, he drains the used water and pours in new water. He adds slime gel and odor-eliminating seasonings, tossing them on top of the cooking stew and covering it with a homemade lid until it's fully cooked. After a while, the main character, holding the lid with a glove, lifts it and looks at the dish with eyes wide open in admiration. His meat is ready. Rushel looks at the piece of meat and notices that it looks very tasty and is literally sparkling. He carefully puts one spoon into his mouth and chews the food carefully. After a while, he closes his eyes in delight because the food is so delicious. He can't even describe how great this meat is. The mucus gave it a sweet taste, and the delicious meat juice just fills his mouth. He continues to eat the delicious meat and says that he has fried this meat before, but the smell was disgusting. Here there is no smell and the taste is great. After a while, the bowl is completely empty. Rushel leans back, resting on his arm, and thanks for the food, noting that he is full. He looks forward with admiration and says that today was a busy day and the food was delicious. He also notes that he collected a lot of materials from the ant, and there are a lot of herbs that he only read about in books. He likes collecting food and materials from monsters. He thinks that life in the mountains is not so bad. Rushel stretches with pleasure and thinks to himself that it is time for him to go home. The boy walks through the forest towards his home, carrying provisions on his back with the help of a bag. However, when he returned home, he realized that he had relaxed too much. The protagonist is amazed and looks ahead with surprise in his eyes. He sees the destroyed tree that served as his home. He runs up to his former home in confusion. They say that this is his home. Rushel climbs up and checks all the food supplies. The boy notices that all the food has been stolen. The protagonist wonders who did this, and realizes that the little monster would never have gotten in here. Suddenly, he hears a terrible roar and freezes in shock. The boy climbs a tree trying to get up. In a year of living here, he's noticed something else. There is a king in this forest. Rushel looks out from behind the leaves with caution, and looks at a large monster eating something. The protagonist understands that this is a troll, the apex predator of this forest. The boy understands that he has crossed paths with him for the first time, and that it is no longer safe here. As long as he is here, he will not be safe anywhere. The boy frowned and realized that he needed to train and become stronger. In the following time, he trained hard, ate as much as possible, and practiced jumping on stones. 10 years later, a small animal runs away in fear from a predator that is much larger than it. A troll is chasing him. The little animal turns around and notices that the monster is preparing to attack. At the last second, the animal is saved by a young man. He holds it by the scruff of the neck and says that it was close. The young man puts it in a bag and asks it to sit in his bag for now. The young man takes the sword out of its sheath and says that he has been training for 10 years for this. He turns to the troll, the king of this forest, and stands up. He says with determination on his face that today is the day he will take his throne. The protagonist, with determination and belligerence on his face, rushes towards the troll, who is also ready to attack. They cross their weapons and glare at each other. Due to the monster's great strength, the protagonist is thrown back, but thanks to his skills, he lands successfully, sliding his feet along the ground. Rushel frowns, looking at the monster. He is amazed by the troll's strength and acknowledges his status as the king of the forest. The monster looks at him, and the protagonist then decides to use magic. He moves his left hand back a little and concentrates. Rushel releases a firebolt from her hand, which rushes at full speed towards the troll. The troll, trying to shield himself from the attack, blocks it with his left hand, but is distracted by her. Rushel takes advantage of the fact that the monster has lost attention, and with the help of a sword, he delivers a quick cutting blow to his side. But you immediately notice that it is not deep. The young man thinks that it doesn't matter, and casts a fire shot in his right hand again, attacking his opponent again. And why does he repeat the same attack again and again in the same way? After a while, the entire area around them is burning with bright flames, and both the monster and the guy are still standing on their feet opposite each other. The main character notices that it is quite hot here, Suddenly, the monster starts concentrating and the guy notices his strange behavior. Suddenly, the troll opens his mouth and shows a big long tongue. The main character immediately reacts to this. Trolls have poorly developed sweat glands, so they are sensitive to heat. They stick out their tongues to regulate their body temperature. The protagonist immediately pushes off with his feet, jumping forward. He thinks that their tongue is their weakest point. The young man cuts off the monster's tongue in a jump, and it falls to the ground. The young man thinks to himself that trolls become slower when they are hot. The monster screams loudly in pain and gets even angrier. Blood drips from his mouth. The troll is furious and rushes at the protagonist. He understands that he has run out of options, and so he decides to eat him. The guy is completely calm and indifferent. He calls it a great try. The monster grabs him in its hands, but it turns out to be a shadow doll. Rushel is already behind him and swings to strike. What the troll grabbed was just an illusion. The protagonist uses his X-ray skill and looks at the monster, seeing its structure from the inside. The young man, with a serious expression on his face, cuts through its flesh with a slight movement of his sword, striking. Monsters are different from other creatures in that they have magic circuits in their body that direct magic power throughout the body. When a large supply of magic power begins to leave the body, it becomes difficult to maintain the body. The troll first writhes in pain and then disappears completely. The protagonist calmly lands on his feet and looks in surprise at the core, which disintegrates into pieces. Rushel joyfully raises his hand up and shouts that he succeeded. He says with a smile on his face that it was not in vain that he trained for 10 years and the king of the forest was defeated, and victory is his. Suddenly he hears some growling from behind his bag. The protagonist remembers the little animal he had put there earlier and, quietly exclaiming, asks for its forgiveness, opening the bag, from which a small animal immediately jumps out. The little animal gets very angry and growls at the guy. The young man squats down and realizes that it is Curl's kitten. He thinks to himself that the little animal is cute. Rushel says that he saved it from the troll and asks him not to be angry. Suddenly, the little animal bends into some strange pose. The main character worries and asks him with excitement in his voice what he is doing. He hears the rumbling of the little visor's stomach, which is squinting. The protagonist realizes that he is hungry and says that he can cook something for him. The young man turns around and notices the troll's tongue, which he cut off some time ago. The young man picks him up off the ground and tells him that he looks disgusting, but it was thanks to this kind of food that he got a whole bunch of different skills. Memories of how many times he cooked the food flash through his mind. After some time, the main character manages to cook a real steak. He brings it to his mouth and is about to try a thick piece of this tongue steak. Taking his first bite, Rushel exclaims in admiration about how delicious it is, saying that the tender steak melts in your mouth and the meat is cooked to perfection, making the flavor rich. He holds a couple of pieces up to the animal and asks if it will eat. He carefully tastes the meat, licking it a little. His eyes open with enthusiasm, and he quickly begins to absorb the food. The guy laughs kindly and asks him if he likes it. Suddenly, the protagonist turns around, noticing something behind him. Not far from him, the little animal is still eating meat. He looks at the monsters approaching them with surprise in his eyes. Putting the food aside, among the animals, he notices wolves and even boars. In the middle of the clearing sit the main character and his new animal, and there is also a fire that is almost out. Various monsters surround them from all sides, clearly wanting to attack. The protagonist, in a warlike mood, takes the sword in his hands and says that this will be a very active training session right after eating, but immediately notes that he has no choice. Suddenly, he gains the skill of a battle cry. Rushel, with a smile on his face, says that he gained a new skill when he ate the troll's tongue and is going to test it now. The monsters are still surrounding them. Suddenly, the little animal behind the protagonist decides to take part and quickly inhales the air and then screams loudly with a very scary face, thereby scaring the monsters around them. The boy, with genuine fear and horror on his face, realizes that this is a battle cry, looking at his new friend, and wonders with surprise if he can use it too. Many different monsters are stunned by the beast's actions and cannot move. The protagonist, despite all his efforts, understands that he cannot move. His new friend growls even louder and louder. The animal quickly rushes forward, wanting to attack their enemies who attack them. Rushel opens his mouth in surprise, watching the actions of the animal. The small animal tears and throws monsters, killing them with quick movements using its claws. The battle cry stuns opponents for a while and increases its physical abilities. After a while, the little animal stands on its paws, looking at the pile of monsters defeated by its paws. Rushel chuckles and looks at the little animal. He thanks it with a smile on his face. Putting the sword back into its sheath, the main character says that this time he saved him. The animal looks at him in response. The guy does not understand what he is trying to tell him. The animal meows, trying to explain what he wants. The protagonist concludes that he wants him to follow him. The animal meows in agreement and walks through the forest. After a while, they come to a clearing, and Rushel looks ahead in surprise. The young man notices traces and struggles of large monsters and examines numerous craters located on the ground. Suddenly, the protagonist notices something and looks at the animal next to him. The same one brings him a stone in his teeth. Rushel is surprised because he understands that it is a magic stone. He sinks down on one knee to be closer to his friend and makes the assumption that his parents fought with this troll. In this case, the main character understands that the animal is also alone, like him. The young man strokes his friend's head, between the ears, with care and trepidation. He covers one eye. A memory appears before the protagonist's eyes, in which his father tells him that he is no longer his son. The animal looks at Rushel's face with surprise. He himself does not notice how he begins to cry. Tears well up in his eyes, and he wonders in surprise. He has become noticeably stronger in these 10 years, but his father would have killed him without relying on magic. The boy tries to wipe the tears from his eyes with his left hand. His new friend cheers him on, trying to support him. There are still tears in the boy's eyes, but he gradually stops crying and thanks the animal for calming him down. He strokes his head again and says that he can't go home yet. The young man offers to live together. The animal happily opens its mouth and meows with pleasure. The main character is happy and says with a smile on his face that he doesn't seem to mind. The guy tries to think of a name for him and eventually calls him Alma. The little animal looks at him in surprise. Rushel explains to him that it is an ancient word that means heroes, and asks him what he thinks about it. He meows with joy on his face and smiles back at him. The protagonist is happy that he liked it. He extends his right hand with a smile on his face, saying that he is glad to meet you, and addresses him by his new name. Suddenly, the protagonist notices something from above and freezes in amazement. He, like Alma, looks up. They both see a large and powerful dragon flying above them. The protagonist covers his face with his left hand because of the strong wind and exclaims in surprise, surprised to see a dragon. He knows that dragons appear once every few years. The dragon does not pay attention to them and continues to fly forward. Dragons are so strong that even trolls hide in their holes. And if trolls are the kings of the forest, the dragons are the masters of the mountains. Rushel watches the dragon fly away and wonders if his father will recognize him if he kills the dragon. The young man does not take his eyes off the monster soaring in the sky. He says with determination in his eyes that everything is decided and raises his sword up, pointing it at the sky, or more precisely at the dragon flying across the sky. Rushel says belligerently that he will kill the dragon. Then the main character and Alma go back to the forests. Thus, 60 years pass. An old man walks through the forest on whose belt a sword is visible. Next to him walks a large and terrible monster. In front of a large rock, Alma asks Rushel with a grin if he is sure of his decision. The old man asks him if he is scared, clearly laughing at his friend. He replies negatively and says that he just thought that his back might seize up. The animals look at their comrade with a smile. The main character parries his joke and says that he has gray hair all over his fur. Rushel throws his gray head back and closes his eyes, remembering how sweet he was. His youth comes before his eyes. The protagonist thinks that in 60 years, his friend has become very daring. Alma uses telepathy to apologize to him for being so impudent. The old man asks him not to use the skill to read his thoughts because he believes it is very important to trust each other and asks if he understands him. Suddenly, they both notice something. The protagonist addresses Alma, but he understands him without words and simply agrees. The old man looks up with tension in his eyes and prepares to draw his sword from its sheath. The friends see an enraged dragon rushing towards them from afar. Rushel does not remove his hand from the sword and says that its flame melts even stones. He asks his friend to be careful. He reciprocates and asks for the same. The dragon approaches them at a fast pace, flapping its large wings. Rushel looks at his enemy with fury in his eyes and says that their opponent is the strongest among dragons, a great dragon. The monster prepares to recreate the attack, and after a moment, with a quick movement, breathes a huge column of fire at Alma and Rushel. They remain calm and peaceful. Alma uses telepathic communication to contact her friend. He understands her instantly and simply agrees with her. Alma opens her mouth and is about to attack the dragon. The beast produces a huge white beam that comes out of its mouth. The dragon's destructive flame collides with Alma's bright beam halfway through, and both spells are stopped. A smokescreen appears, blocking the dragon's view of the battlefield. A moment later, when the smoke clears, the dragon sees Rushel in front of him, about to attack him with his sword. To defeat him, the main character forged a sword that took about 60 years to make, the Dragon Slayer. He quickly pulls his sword out of its sheath and is about to attack his enemy immediately. The protagonist strikes the enemy from above downwards, cutting the air with his sword. The dragon quickly moves away from the blow and looks at the old man in front of him with anger and fury in his eyes. He waves his tail and uses it to strike the main character. He lands on his feet without any problems and continues to look at his opponent. The dragon towers over him menacingly. The dragon twists and kicks with all its might at the place where the main character landed earlier. The old man loudly shouts to Alma that the dragon is sitting down and looking at him. His friend looks at Rushel in response and says that he understands what he means. The beast immediately uses his own skill, and the dragon's paws are immediately covered in a crust of thick ice. Alma uses her ability and casts ice shackles, which causes the dragon to gradually become covered in thick ice, freezing it right down to its wings. The beast tells his old friend that the dragon cannot move for now. The protagonist immediately rushes forward, preparing to launch an attack with the ball at their opponent. Rushel squats down for a more effective throw during the attack and grabs the sword with his right hand, preparing to draw it from its sheath to wound the dragon. The main character also uses his skill of a flurry of blows, and a real hail of blows of the main character falls on the dragon. Many of his attacks fall on different parts of his body. The protagonist silently addresses his opponent and asks how he feels about Rushel's attack. The dragon looks askance at his enemy, who attacks him. At some point, the dragon manages to catch the old man, and he uses his eyes to do so. The man looks at the dragon and falls for the trick it uses on him. The man exclaims inwardly and realizes with annoyance that he has made a mistake. He notices a change in his body, and their enemy is not going to stop and wants to continue attacking him. Alma, with concern in her voice, addresses Rushel by name and fears for her friend and his life. At the last moment, he protects the old man from the dragon's attack, and he gratefully exclaims his name. Both friends land on the ground quite successfully. The beast, without looking at him, asks him if he is okay. He answers positively. The old man looks at his friend and says that he believed that he would save him. Alma's face turns bright red when he hears his friend's words. Because of his friend's praise, he asks him with an embarrassed voice why he suddenly decided to say it so abruptly. The old man looks at the dragon standing in front of them with concentration in his gaze and thinks to himself that he told the truth, because without Alma he would already be dead. However, the main character's thought that if his father were here, he would win alone does not leave him. Rushel and Alma again go on the attack on their enemy, the great dragon, who also intends to fight them. The old man attacks the dragon with his sword and thinks that his father was faster. He dodges the attack of the great dragon and thinks that his father was more agile. The thought of his father does not want to leave the protagonist. He constantly thinks about him. Memories from the distant past flash through his mind, in which the protagonist's father looks at him with a terrifying gaze and addresses him, calling him inferior. Suddenly, the old man puts his sword forward and notices that the dragon is about to perform another attack. The monster opens its mouth, and a column of bright light begins to come out of its mouth. The protagonist agrees with his father's words and thinks that he is truly inferior to him. The protagonist, despite the dragon's attack, is going to counterattack him. Alma, with concern for her friend in her voice, shouts loudly to the protagonist, addressing him by name. The dragon looks ahead with surprise in his eyes and is amazed at what he just saw. Rushel's clothes were slightly burnt, but he managed to leave the fight almost uninjured. The old man sits on one knee and covers his face with his right hand. It took him 60 years of training to defeat just one dragon. The protagonist says that he got the skill of heat resistance because he ate the meat of a firebird for 60 years, so the dragon's flame won't take him. The old man looks at his opponent with determination in his eyes. The dragon is very surprised by such a skill of his enemies. His eyes are wide open because he is amazed. The monster suddenly spreads its wings and soars upward, trying to escape from them. He and his friend look up at the dragon, trying to escape. Alma says with anger in her voice that she can't let him, and Rushel finishes the conversation for him and makes it clear that she won't let him escape. The man soars upward using his flying skill. He thinks he is still far from his father, but he has been training hard for 60 years. The old man quickly gains altitude to catch up with his opponent faster. Finally, when he reaches the right height, the old man prepares to attack and remembers his childhood and his youth. The dragon looks at him in surprise, his eyes wide open in surprise. The protagonist thinks that this time he will be able to kill him. Rushel, with one sharp and at the same time fast movement, makes a slashing blow at the enemy and cuts him in half. The protagonist cuts the dragon in half in a jump. It freezes for a second, unable to comprehend what happened a moment ago. The monster coughs up blood and falls to the ground, landing behind Rushel, who lands successfully on his feet. Alma runs up to him with a cheerful expression and happily says that they did it. The protagonist does not show any emotion and only dryly agrees with his friend's statement. He says that they have killed a great dragon and looks at the body of the monster, lying belly up on the ground. The beast stands next to him and also looks at the defeated enemy. The protagonist believes that before it disappears, the meat needs to be cut off. He wants to cut it up right now and is already getting all the materials he needs for this. Alma agrees with her friend. An elderly man approaches the fallen dragon and touches its scales with his left hand. Rushel turns to the great dragon and, closing his eyes, folds his hands in front of the dragon's body in a pleading gesture. The protagonist sincerely thanks him for his meat, and then proceeds to process his meat. He cuts up pieces of flesh, uses his sword to clean the meat from scales, and cuts up pieces of meat. After a while, the protagonist exhales with relief and wipes the sweat from his forehead with his right hand. He has finished his part of the work and looks at the finished result. The man says it looks delicious as he looks at the large amount of raw meat left behind by the dragon. Alma happily raises her upper paws and says his mouth is already watering. Finally, he offers to take it home and finally start cooking. His friend agrees with him. Alma asks the old man how he will cook it. The beast immediately presents a couple of examples in the form of a steak or a hamburger. He is also not at all against eating meat completely raw. The man says that he has been eating steaks for 80 years, and they make him sick. He would like something new. Alma, who is carrying all the bags of meat they collected after defeating the dragon on his back, jokes a little about his friend, and says that he grumbles like an old man. The old man tells him not to worry. Rushel will do everything in the best possible way. And most importantly, he must put the meat somewhere, while he prepares everything. After some time, they come to a place that they were able to inhabit, and sees a large tree in front of them. This old tree became their home. There was a cavity inside. He expanded it and got a comfortable house. The main character goes inside his home and thoughtfully scratches his beard. More than 70 years have passed since he was thrown into these mountains. During this time, he conducted a lot of different studies, doing everything by trial and error. He and Alma began growing grain crops and vegetables. This allowed them to make alcohol by fermentation, oriental spices, and sauces. The main character received an education only up to 8 years, but thanks to the skill of wisdom which he received by eating the monster Simurg, he learned to make various tools and seasonings, sugar, salt, herbs, and more. However, the old man continues to talk about how it took him 40 years to put it all together in his head. He is ready to start cooking. Alma eagerly asks how soon the food will be ready. He asks him not to hurry and begins to process the meat of the great dragon, deftly wielding a knife. The protagonist notes to himself that the flesh is moist and tender, and the meat seems to shine. He thinks that the meat at the base of the wings is well developed and can be tough, and Alma likes that. He continues to cut the meat, and this time I think that he likes the soft meat at the tail better. He fits the pieces thinly. After a short period of time, the dishes are completely ready, and the most delicious delicacies appear before the beast. Rushel proudly calls this shabu from the great dragon. Alma is indignant and exclaims in surprise. He does not understand what shabu shabu is and thinks it would be better if he just cooked a steak. The protagonist encourages him to try it first and then complain. The protagonist takes a slice of meat with chopsticks and carefully dips it, then takes it out and puts it in his mouth. Rushel is overwhelmed by the magical taste and raises his left hand up, clenching his fist. A slight blush appears on the protagonist's face. The old man closes his eyes and hits his knees with pleasure from the food, saying that it is very tasty. He also speaks with pleasure about the soft meat, which the more you chew, the more vividly its flavor reveals, and mentions the sauce, which is also very important, and without it the dish is not the same. It then proceeds to list all the sauces: vinegar, mirin and soy sauce, citrus juice. Thanks to them you can get ponzu, which is ideal for shabu shabu. The old man holds out a cup with an excellent sauce. The main character continues to gobble up the deliciously cooked meat and asks his friend if he will eat. Alma is perplexed and looks at the old man with caution. He skeptically agrees to try the meat prepared by his friend. The beast first dips a piece of meat and then swallows it. His eyes immediately widen in surprise. Alma says with admiration in her eyes that it is delicious. The old man smiles at him and reminds his friend that he told him about it. He says that the meat just melts in your mouth, and his friend agrees with him. After a while, Rushel and Alma are lying on the ground with their bellies up. Empty plates are scattered around them. The protagonist exhales heavily and says that he has eaten too much. The beast notices that it was very tasty. Suddenly, Alma turns to her friend. He looks at him questioningly. The beast asks him what he will do now and reminds him that he wanted to get his father's approval. He says that Rushel has defeated the great dragon and now he recognizes him. The main character is silent and looks into nowhere. The old man thinks to himself that he has become stronger, it is true, and now he can easily leave here. But people do not have such a long life, and his father is most likely no longer there. Alma turns away a little and says that if Rushel leaves here, he will be left alone. Tears well up in the beast's eyes, but the protagonist approaches him and puts his hand on his head, stroking him. Rushel kneels down in front of him and asks him not to worry, as he will always live here. Alma is surprised by his words, and out of disbelief even asks if it is true. The protagonist calms him down and asks if he is lonely without him. He smiles indulgently and says that Alma has become more mature, but in his soul he is still the same kitten. Suddenly, Rushel notices something strange. The protagonist and Alma begin to be enveloped by a strange kind of energy. Rushel feels something unusual and strange in her body, and opens her eyes in surprise, not understanding what is happening. Alma turns to him and says that something is wrong. His whole body is burning. The protagonist also feels a burning sensation all over his body. He wonders to himself what is happening and makes the assumption that this is the curse of the great dragon. Some changes happen to their bodies. The protagonist reaches out to Alma with difficulty and asks him to hold on. He opens his eyes in surprise, looking at his old friend. Instead of a big beast, he sees in front of him that old little beast he met once. The protagonist asks if he has problems with his eyesight in his old age, and says that Alma is very small. His friend asks him what he's carrying, and asks him to look at himself. The protagonist is surprised to notice changes in his body. He looks at his hand and is amazed that it is very small for an adult. The main character has turned from an old man into a little boy, in whose form he once came to this forest. Rushel is very surprised that he has become younger. Alma assumes that this is the effect of the meat of the great dragon. The boy agrees with him, but also suggests that it could be something else. He turns to his friend and asks him to use his assessment. He agrees and uses his assessment skill, looking at Rushel. The boy looks at him impatiently and asks what he sees and if anything has changed. Alma sees a sign that says that Rushel's status is now immortal. The little animal looks at this with surprise. The main character is named Rushel Hoff Tristan. When he was 5 years old, he was banished to the mountains filled with monsters. He survived in the mountains for 60 years and ate monsters to gain various skills. With Alma, he was able to defeat the great dragon and ate its meat. Rushel has many memories that happened to him in the past flashing through his mind. Images flash before his eyes of his father banishing him to the mountains, him trying to survive alone in the forest. After some time, he meets Alma and eventually defeats the dragon. The main character and Alma have grown younger and gained immortality, and 300 years have passed since those events. In one deserted clearing, there is a beautiful and thick tree, in which you can see windows and a door. Inside the treehouse, Alma turns to Rushel and casually asks if there will be crisp grass, bread, and wild bear meat again today. The little animal whines and says that he is already fed up. Rushel asks his friend not to complain, because in 300 years they have already eaten everything they could, and the dish is gone. The boy exhales and looks at Alma. They live well together, and they are immortal. Sometimes Rushel and Alma quarrel, but mostly they live in perfect harmony. The protagonist tells him that they've already tried everything. Alma asks her friend if he really doesn't regret not leaving, because there is probably a lot in the outside world. The boy eats his sandwich food calmly. He stops, closes his eyes, and with a sweet smile on his face says that everything is fine, and that he likes it here. Rushel remembers that he needs to pick zen fruits. They will eat them with yogurt. He remembers that his friend likes these fruits. The boy says that he will come quickly. Alma thinks about her friend. The protagonist walks along a small forest path and thinks about the outside world to himself. He thinks that he would be lying if he said that he did not regret anything. However, he has lived here for 300 years. Rushel turns his head upward, throwing it back, and looks at the sky with bewilderment and confusion. He wonders if he can find a place for himself in the outside world. Suddenly, the protagonist notices something next to him. He recognizes this feeling and wants to know what it is. The boy hides behind one of the trees, peeking out a little. Rushel opens his eyes in surprise, looking ahead. He sees people in one of the many clearings and is very much surprised by this, his mouth open. 3 people are sitting next to a girl who is lying down, who is clearly wounded. The protagonist wonders where the people are from, especially 4 of them, and does not understand why they are here, because it is not so easy for people to get here. However, after a short period of time, he calms himself down and says that it does not matter. One of the guys addresses the girl lying down as Mildy and asks her to hold on. He turns to the other girl with a frightened expression and asks if there are any healing potions left. She regretfully replies negatively. The protagonist watches all this and realizes that she is injured. He wonders what to do. He does not have to interfere with this, because they may be hostile. The thought flashes through his mind to leave, because they will be eaten by monsters anyway. Rushel clenches his right fist with all his might, finally making a decision. He can't leave them like that. The protagonist emerges from the bushes, hesitantly trying to find words, stuttering. All the people in the clearing are very surprised by his presence here. The man who spoke before is amazed that there is a child in this forest. Another girl asks where the child could be from. The protagonist, with even more uncertainty and confusion in his voice, asks them if they are wounded. The people in front of him are perplexed by him and his words. The young man wonders what he said. The girl quietly whispers that it is something like an old-fashioned manner of speech. The protagonist is at first surprised by her words, and then remembers that 300 years have passed. He thinks that if he pulls himself together, they will understand him. The boy reaches into his bag and quickly takes out a small round ball, handing it to the strangers. Rushel says that it is medicine and they can take it. The girl asks again about the medicine and asks what it is. The protagonist understands something that they do not trust him logically. He assumes that if he says that it is made of mucus, they are unlikely to take it. The protagonist eats another similar thing, putting it in his mouth, and says that there is nothing dangerous about it. The others want to resist, but the young man interrupts them. The guy says that Mildy won't last long and they have no choice. They are forced to take the medicine. The girl next to him turns to him in surprise as a leader. The young man hands the girl some medicine lying on the cloth and tells her to eat it. Mildy chews it with difficulty at first, but after a while she exhales easily and her breathing returns to normal. The young man and the man are happy about this. The girl next to him says that her breathing and pulse have calmed down and she feels better. The main character shows them the way in a certain direction and says that his house is in that direction, and the monsters cannot get close to it. The boy also mentions that you can rest there. After some time, a group of strangers end up visiting the boy and Alma in the treehouse. The boy puts Mildy, who is still unconscious, on the bed. The young man looks around his house and is surprised that there is such a place in the mountains. Alma uses her telepathy skill to contact her friend and asks him to explain it. He apologizes to him and offers to explain everything later. The girl next to her wounded friend with concern and confusion on her face, says that if she restores her magical power, she will be able to use healing magic. The main character hands the girl a round ball and says that if she has run out of magical power, she should eat this. The young girl exclaims in surprise, looking at him. She finally accepts the gift from Rushel after thinking for a bit, and first takes the stone in her hands, and then puts it in her mouth. She frowns a little because she doesn't know what to expect. Suddenly, her eyes widen in surprise. The girl covers her mouth with her right hand. The young man next to her addresses her as Rushel with concern and fear in his eyes. Suddenly, the girl jumps up, and admiration is visible in her eyes. She says that it is delicious. The rest of their teammates are very surprised by her behavior. The girl thinks that the delicate sweetness and slight sourness like fruit juice is wonderful. She also compares it to the cakes that aristocrats eat. Suddenly, the girl notices her strange behavior and becomes a little embarrassed. The young man says that everything is clear with taste and hurries to clarify about the magical power. She apologizes to them, still embarrassed. The girl uses some spell and says that all the magic power has been restored. The guy says that it is impossible because even a potion does not restore all the magic power. His teammate says that it is true. The protagonist is a little embarrassed. He thinks that this candy is made of slime and it is better to keep quiet about it. Little Alma watches all this from behind his friend. The girl says that she will heal her now and use Ariel's healing. She orders to heal the injured child with her breath. Light emanates from her, which gradually falls on the girl, who is unconscious. The healer sighs in relief and says that Mildy will be fine now, will rest and open her eyes. The young man is happy about this and says that he understood her. He turns towards Rushel and thanks him. He leans over and shakes the protagonist's hand, introducing himself as Fleddy. The boy also says his name. Fleddy says that they are grateful to him. The boy is a little embarrassed and says that he is not worth thanking. Suddenly, the young man stops and says that it's all too suspicious. His healing candies and peaceful life in the mountains where monsters are everywhere. The guy looks at him with all seriousness in his eyes and says that he does not want to poke his nose into the affairs of their savior, but is forced to ask the question of who he is. Alma uses telepathy to ask the protagonist what he will do and doubts that they will believe him if he tells them the truth. The boy looks at his guests hesitantly and begins his story. He says that his father was very strict and he was very weak, so he was banished. Luckily, he has knowledge of cooking and medicine, and so he was able to survive here. Using telepathy, the protagonist tells his friend that he did not lie, but when they find out what the monster ate, they will still be shocked. Alma, who is standing behind him, agrees with him. Fleddy frowns and says it's a nightmare. He addresses the guy by name and asks how long he's been in this hell. Rushel hesitates at first, almost accidentally telling the truth, and then says he's been there for 3 years. The man looks at him silently. The protagonist frowns because he thinks that they didn't believe him and thinks that it's bad. The knight reaches out to him and then warmly embraces the boy. Tears roll down the young man's face, and he says that it was very hard for the boy. The protagonist thinks to himself that he's been living like this for 300 years and does not feel anything. The boy smiles easily and thinks that Fleddy is a good person. Suddenly, he notices the looks directed at him from other people. Suddenly, even for him, the main character starts crying. The second man pats him on the head, and the girl hugs him from behind, telling him how smart he is. Rushel starts to cry very loudly, sobbing. Alma silently watches this and remembers that Rushel's mother died when he was a child, and his father never hugged him. He lived 300 years and never cried. The little animal's eyes also fill with tears as he watches this heartbreaking picture. He is happy that his friend has finally experienced human kindness. After some time, the main character finally calms down and, continuing to wipe away tears, apologizes to them. The boy changes the subject and asks what they forgot in these mountains. At first, the friends are silent, but then Fleddy says that first, they should introduce themselves. The boy says that he is Fleddy Heimbird. The man calls himself Garner Bard, and the healer introduces himself as Rushel Vig. The unconscious girl is named Mildy Wallum. The guy explains to him that they serve in the knightly order of Duke Retivia. They came here to return the stolen relics of the Retivia family. The protagonist asks him again about the family relics with surprise. The young man answers his question positively and says that a relic was stolen that must be returned. He admits that they were unable to protect it, and in order to return it, they attacked their lair. Memories from the battle in the enemy's lair flashed through his head. Alma understands that they failed and had to flee. The protagonist also agrees with him through telepathy. He says that looking at them, he sees that they are far from weak, but it seems that the leader of the bandits is also experienced. Fletty looks at her unconscious friend and says that as soon as Mildy gets better, they plan to attack a second time. The protagonist approaches them and is about to offer his help. However, the young man says that he is glad that he wants to help, but it is their problem and he cannot drag him into it. The boy agrees in this case and offers them at least to drink herbs that will relieve fatigue. He offers them to drink this and rest. The boy sincerely thanks him. After a while, both girls are asleep on the bed, and the boys are dozing, leaning against a tree. The boy mentally apologizes to them for giving them a drink made from the scales of a monster moth. They will be able to sleep and have a good rest, and tomorrow morning, they will already be in perfect condition. Alma turns to her friend. He responds in kind. The protagonist asks him to look after them. The little animal asks him where he is going. Rushel stutters a little, but imagines in his head how they hug him, and says that he also wants to help them a little. Alma, with a smile on her face, says that she understands and asks him to be careful. The boy agrees with him and thinks about using the skill he got from eating the cloud elemental. The main character quickly flies up and already at a decent height from the ground uses the Black Raven skill, which gives him night vision. The boy hangs in the air and looks at the horizon. He sees a road and realizes that people began to live even here after 300 years. He puts his hand forward and thinks that this is where Fletty and the others came from. The boy uses the Ravadier skill to detect a presence. After a long distance, the boy finally notices the bandits and is happy that he found them. He listens to their dialogues with the help of the skill and understands that, judging by their conversations, these are exactly the same bandits who fought with his new friends. The protagonist unexpectedly lands next to the enemies. The men are clearly aggressive. One of them asks who he is. Rushel asks them not to be offended and says that he just wants to help some people. Rushel stood before the crowd of menacing bandits and firmly told them that he would give them a chance. Rushel told them that they should leave everything they stole and go. Then Rushel threatened that if they refused, Rushel would not restrain himself. From which all the bandits looked at Rushel in bewilderment, not understanding his words. Then all the bandits started laughing loudly and mockingly asking about this kid, menacingly grabbing their swords. Some said that he was cute, and some offered to sell him to buyers. Rushel stood in front of them looking at them with a very serious look and listening to them laugh. Then he calmly told them that they were not in the mood for conversation and he now had no choice. Then Rushel ran very quickly between the bandits who were still laughing at his words and attacked each one quickly and unnoticed. Rushel stood behind them, and a moment later, all the bandits were simultaneously wounded. The bandits began to fall to the ground, unable to bear it and wheezing in pain. Some of the bandits, lying on the ground, looked at Rushel, stretching out their hands to him and thought hopelessly that he was not an ordinary boy. Rushel watched them until all the bandits fell, put his one hand in front of him using magic and directed it at the small fire. And at that moment, a small fire lit up. All the bandits gradually came to their senses from the pain, but still lying down and angrily they asked Rushel about who he was. To which Rushel, ignoring their words, attracted the attention of all the bandits, telling everyone to listen carefully. Rushel stood menacingly in front of all the bandits and threateningly told them to leave the mountains immediately and leave the life of bandits. He advised them to live their lives honestly and forget about what happened here, as well as about him. All the bandits looked at Rushel in surprise. At that moment, Rushel raised his hand and threateningly told them that otherwise, no matter where they hid, and without finishing his words, Rushel put his hand in front of him. Then, pointing his hand towards the forest and using his magical power, he completely destroyed the area in front of him, along with all the trees and plants. Seeing his mighty power, all the bandits looked at Rushel with fascination, with their mouths open and fear in their eyes, saying nothing. Rushel stood in front of them very threateningly, and looking at them menacingly told them that he would find them all. All the bandits started screaming and getting up from their places in fear. They ran very convulsively into the forest with frightened screams, running away from Rushel. Looking after the fleeing bandits, Rushel thought that his threat should have worked. Then looking around, Rushel thought with relief that he had figured it out, and now he needed to find their base. Suddenly noticing a rag on the ground, Rushel picked it up and sniffed it, after which he turned away from the stinking rag in disgust. Wiping his eyes and smelling the scent around him, he told himself that he would definitely be able to find them with the scent. He then used his power of movement and moved to the other end of the forest, thinking about what he needed to go there. At this time, two guards were sitting in front of the large cave on either side, holding their long spears and guarding the entrance. One of them was plump in build and was drinking water, while the other was thinner. The two guards sat there doing nothing and just stared ahead. At this time, Rushel hid in a tall tree behind the branches and watched the guards confirming his thoughts, thinking that this was their main base. Rushel then touched his forehead with his finger and mentally summoned the Big Bat skill sonar. Burying his eyes, Rushel watched and thought that this was a deep cave that they had modified in order to make it a base, and mentally seeing inside the cave, he thought that it was like a labyrinth, and in fact the most direct path was somewhere here. Understanding the entire trajectory of the cave, Rushel opened his eyes and reached into his pocket bags thinking that everything was going well. Then taking out a small sprout from his bag, he threw them straight down to the guards. The guards quickly noticed a falling sprout, which fell right in the middle of them. They looked at the sprout with confusion, after which the sprout began to emit an aroma, from which the guards, having sniffed it, immediately fell asleep sitting up. Rushel jumped from the tree and landed on the ground thinking that the branches of the sleeping tree put people to sleep with pollen without smell and taste. But they did not work on Rushel, because he had resistance. Passing the sleeping guards, Rushel approached the entrance to the cave and rummaged through his bags. He once again threw a branch of the sleeping tree into the cave. Rushel himself hid behind the entrance, watching what was happening. With the help of a branch of a sleeping tree, Rushel put all the bandits inside the cave to sleep. And running between them, he looked at the sleeping bandits who were lying right on the ground and thought that everything worked for him. Running forward, Rushel thought that he could of course destroy all the bandits. But if he did so, Fleddy might feel guilty. After all, the task of Fleddy and the others is to return what was stolen. Rushel stopped, seeing a man in front of him who was holding a long sword and resolutely thought that he would do everything to help with this, because he did not want such good people to die. A bandit with an iron helmet and a large build stood in front of Rushel holding his head and trying not to lose consciousness from the scent of the sleeping tree. The bandit looked at Rushel and asked him who he was and what he was doing here. Rushel looked at the bandit, who was rubbing his eyes from the scent of the sleeping tree and holding his long iron sword tightly with both hands, pointing it at Rushel. Rushel privately suggested that he might be their leader. Watching the angry leader, Rushel thought that he could resist the effect of the sleeping tree. Still watching him, Rushel assessed him and thought that the leader of the bandits was no stronger than Fleddy, and all this meant something else. At this time, the bandit leader raised his long sword high and furiously called Rushel and asked him if he was pretending to be deaf. Rushel ignored his question, looked at the leader's sword, and realized that it was all about this magic sword. At this time, the magic sword in the hands of the bandit leader caught fire with a bright flame. The bandit leader, tightly clutching the sword in his hands, directed it straight at Rushel, creating fiery waves. Rushel managed to jump back, jumping high. Rushel landed further away from the leader, to which the leader of the bandits clicked his tongue in displeasure. The sword in the hands of the leader of the bandits was burning with fire, losing the shape of a sword. But the leader of the bandits did not stop attacking and was still preparing for a new attack. Looking at him in the flaming sword, Rushel thought that this was very troublesome. The bandit leader swung his sword at Rushel again, trying to wound him, but due to Rushel's quick jumps and bounces, the bandit leader became even more angry, cursing, already attacking Rushel more and more, asking him how long he was going to run. Rushel, without answering anything, continued to dodge the attacks. The leader still tried to hurt Rushel, brazenly asking him if he was afraid to fight like that. They wasn't even going to. Rushel dodged this attack this time, simply dodging to the left. Rushel, bouncing back from the blows, thought that the leader of the bandits had mastered the sword, which required a huge supply of magical power, and Rushel was not surprised that Fleddy lost, because the leader was not a simple bandit, but he had talent. All this time watching the leader of the bandits, Rushel thought that there was still one thing, but as soon as the leader wanted to make another attack, Rushel disappeared before his eyes. The leader, not understanding, shouted very furiously, saying that Rushel had disappeared. Suddenly, a punch flew straight into the face of the embittered leader from Rushel, who had suddenly appeared. The leader flew further from the strong blow, which caused his nose to bleed and he lost consciousness. Then Rushel stopped and clenched his fist, looked at the bandit leader, and calmly told him that he was not his opponent. After Rushel's battle with the leader, a new day had come and it was just beginning to dawn. At this time, Fleddy and Garner and the others who were lying near the tree began to wake up. Fleddy stretched and noticed Rushel and Alma standing nearby with their backs to them, and standing in front of the table, wearing an apron, preparing something. Rushel and Alma, noticing them, turned around and happily wished everyone a good morning. Fleddy and Garner, already up, approached Rushel and also wished Rushel a good morning. Fleddy awkwardly scratched the back of his head and asked Rushel for forgiveness, saying that they had fallen asleep very soundly. To which Rushel simply laughed softly and thought that it was all because he had given them sleeping pills. But Rushel would naturally keep quiet about it. Rushel recalled his fight yesterday, in which the leader was defeated, and drew conclusions for himself. The leader of the bandits was a formidable opponent, but if they prepared correctly, Fleddy and the others had a good chance of winning. Mentally understanding what the others needed to win, Rushel took the chicken meat and placed it on the table. Watching Rushel's actions, Fleddy asked him what it was, to which Rushel smiled at Fleddy and replied that he had decided to prepare breakfast, setting to work and using everything that was on the table. Fleddy awkwardly asked Rushel for forgiveness, saying that now, because of them, Rushel would have to cook breakfast, to which Rushel calmly replied that it was nothing to worry about and asked him not to apologize. Sitting next to the table and watching the actions, Alma mentally asked Rushel if he was worried, to which Rushel, taking a knife in his hands and looking, mentally excitedly answered Alma that he had not cooked for anyone other than them for a long time. With a knife in his hands, Rushel began to cut the chicken meat into pieces. Looking at the chicken meat, Fleddy asked Rushel about this meat, to which Rushel replied that it was the meat of local birds. While preparing his breakfast, Rushel spoke the instructions out loud to the others, demonstrating the preparation. Rushel explained that the meat is first cut and seasoned with salt, and then poured with alcohol. Leaving the meat alone, Rushel said that the meat should lie for a while. Then Rushel took several eggs and broke them directly into a deep bowl. Then, taking a fork, Rushel began to beat the eggs with it. After that, he added flour and homemade grated cheese to the bowl with the eggs. Watching Rushel, Fleddy told him that he was so good at it, and curiously asked him if he had prepared all these ingredients himself. To which Rushel smiled, confirming and added that he had enough time. Fleddy, looking at Rushel with admiration, told him that he was amazing, and now Fleddy understood how Rushel was able to survive in these mountains, because without such skills, it would have been impossible. Suddenly, at that moment, Mildy ran straight towards them, calling her leader and wishing him good morning. Rushel and Fleddy turned towards the sound to look at her. Then Mildy came running and immediately rushed to Rushel, joyfully and tightly hugging him and wishing him good morning as well, which made Rushel very surprised and blushed, embarrassed by such an action. Fleddy called Mildy by name with a smile and asked her if she had recovered. To which Mildy, releasing Rushel from his embrace, happily answered him that she felt fine. Mildy then turned to Rushel, stroking his hair and holding his shoulders tightly, happily thanking him for his medicine. To which Rushel awkwardly replied that it was not worth it, and mentally admired, thinking that Mildy was a beastman. Mildy happily stood in front of Rushel and pointed to herself, introducing herself by saying that her name was Mildy Valem, and she thanked Rushel again for his help. Mildy noticed Rushel looking at her fox ears and pointing to her own ears, asked Rushel if he liked them. Rushel began to stutter, not knowing what to say. Then Mildy, with a wide smile, told him that she was a yellow fox and they could hide their ears and tail. Then Mildy turned back and showed Rushel her long, fluffy tail, saying that she could show it to her savior. Mildy said that her tail was very fluffy and offered Rushel to touch it. Rushel looked at the fluffy tail and was very fascinated and raised his hands to touch her tail. At this time, Rushel suddenly showed up to them calling Mildy and asking discontentedly what she was doing there, to which Mildy simply called her happily. Then Rushel came up to Rushel and pressed him to her chest, displeasedly telling Mildy not to embarrass him. To which Rushel became embarrassed by such an action of Rushel and involuntarily pressed himself to her, But Mildy grabbed Rushel back, also pressing him to her chest and answering Rushel that he was not against it. This made Rushel even more awkward and embarrassed, since he was now pressed against Mildy's chest. The two girls did not calm down, arguing more and more about one of them not bothering Rushel, to which the other replied that he did not mind. Both girls pressed Rushel from both sides, which made Rushel stand even more embarrassed between them. Then Fletty calmed the girls down, sighing tiredly and saying that they had both already tortured Rushel, from which the girls, looking at the blushing Rushel between them, immediately began to ask him for forgiveness, to which Rushel awkwardly replied that everything was fine. After that, Rushel asked Rushel what he was doing, to which Rushel, remembering his business, answered that he was preparing breakfast. Rushel took the infused chicken meat, checking it, and happily said that the meat was just infused. Rushel took the marinated meat and dipped it in beaten eggs. Then he put them in a plate with breadcrumbs and sprinkled it on each side of the meat. After that, he put the meat in a frying pan with heated oil and fried it on both sides. After that, Rushel took the freshly baked bread and cut it in half. Then he put crispy lettuce leaves inside the bread and put the already cooked meat on top, covering it with half of the bread on the other side. After which he put the finished dish on a plate and happily informed everyone that everything was ready and, pointing to the dish, said that it was a chicken fillet sandwich. Everyone else, along with Rushel, looked at the sandwich with admiration and surprise at the new dish, which made some even drool at the sight of the sandwich. Then suddenly Mildy took the sandwich and happily stepped aside, telling everyone that she was the first, while Rushel was displeased with her antics, calling her name. Then Mildy took the first bite of the sandwich and was delighted with the taste of this chicken sandwich, telling everyone that it was very tasty. Happily wagging her tail, Mildy turned to Rushel, noting out loud the crispy bun, juicy meat, and juicy lettuce leaf, and admiringly said that it was impossible to resist, and thanked Rushel for such delicious food. Rushel called Mildy in displeasure, reproaching her for being rude again. Mildy asked her to stop grumbling and open her mouth, and then stuffed a sandwich into her mouth. Rushel involuntarily bit off a piece of the sandwich and tasted it immediately, admiring the taste of the sandwich, thinking that it was very tasty. Then Mildy happily told Rushel that that was what she was talking about, to which Rushel became embarrassed, adjusting her glasses, and awkwardly said that the sandwich was indeed delicious. Rushel, having studied the taste of the sandwich, commented on the slightly spicy and reddish meat, and asked Rushel what kind of bird it was. Rushel happily replied that it was a species endemic to the local area, and he felt awkward about its name. At this time, Mildy happily told everyone that it didn't matter as long as it tasted good. Then, offering sandwiches to Fletty and Garner, she told them to try it, to which Fletty felt awkward eating Rushel's food without asking. Rushel immediately reproached her for her bad manners, and Rushel smiled, saying that everything was fine and told them to eat as much as they wanted. Looking at the guys, Rushel awkwardly and mentally asked for their forgiveness, because the thing is that this is the meat of the firebird monster bird, and when they eat it, their resistance to fire will increase. Then, Rushel looked at the happy children who were eating each of their portions while talking to each other. Then Alma came up to him and mentally told Rushel that he looked happy, to which Rushel agreed with him, saying that this was the first time he had fed anyone here besides him. Rushel mentally told Alma that he was glad that they liked everything. At that moment, Mildy called him to come to them. Then Alma mentally told Rushel to come to them, to which Rushel looked at Alma in surprise. After Mildy took a plate with a sandwich, approached Rushel, grabbed his hands, and happily told him that he himself had prepared breakfast and invited him to eat with them. Mildy gave the plate with the sandwich to Rushel, after which Rushel took the sandwich in his hands and looked at it and thought that he had eaten something like this 1,000 times, and he had long since gotten tired of it. But there was still something new. After taking a bite of the sandwich, chewing it, and finally swallowing it, Rushel immediately beamed with happiness, already taking another bite of the sandwich. Mildy, Rushel, Flatty, and Garner looked at him with happy faces. Then Rushel applauded Rushel, asking him if the sandwich was tasty, to which Rushel, with tears in his eyes and a happy smile, responded with consent, continuing to eat his sandwich. Everyone else looked at Rushel with satisfaction, and Rushel almost cried from this reaction. Among them was also Alma, and Rushel himself, happily eating his sandwich with the others, thought that he didn't know that when you eat with a lot of people, the food becomes much tastier. Fletty, Mildy, Rushel, and Garner stood in front of Rushel with all their things gathered. They told Rushel that it was time for them to leave. Fletty, as the main leader of the team, thanked Rushel for everything he had done for them. Rushel was happy for them, saying that it wasn't worth it and advised them to be careful. But suddenly, Mildy calls him by name very loudly, causing Rushel to shudder a little, looking at her. Mildy ran to Rushel, hugging him, and with a little sadness said that she did not want to say goodbye to him, and turning to Fletty, she asked him if they could take Rushel with them. Rushel was embarrassed by her hugs. Fletty called Mildy seriously, telling her that they couldn't take Rushel with them, and reminded her of their mission. At that moment, Rushel grabbed Mildy by the collar, pulling her away from Rushel. Then Rushel thought a little sadly that Fletty and the others really couldn't take him with them since they were going to the bandits' lair, and they couldn't take the child with them. At this time, Rushel approached Rushel, smiling kindly at him and asking for the opportunity to thank him separately. Rushel hugged Rushel tenderly and thanked him, told him that he had helped them a lot, and then she wished him all the best. Rushel was touched by such gratitude. After hugging Rushel, Garner's hand fell on Rushel's shoulder. Garner squatted down in front of Rushel to be at his height and told him that the food was very good and invited him to eat together again. Rushel smiled cheerfully at Garner as well. Mildy and Rushel were shouting at Garner off to the side, saying that he was proposing to Rushel. Rushel smiled at this and sadly wondered when he had last had this much fun, and he didn't want to part like this. Interrupting his thoughts, Fletty called him, saying that he had cured Mildy and even provided him with shelter and delicious food. Then he added, saying that if they met again and had the opportunity, he would like to introduce him to his master. To which Rushel smiled at Fletty, telling him not to worry about it, because that's what everyone would do. Then Rushel bid him farewell and wished him to take care of himself. Fletty smiled and thanked Rushel and told him that he hoped to meet Rushel again. As they left, the entire team waved goodbye to Rushel, including Mildy, who was actively jumping and waving to him, and Rushel also waved back. Then Alma approached Rushel, praising him as a good boy, and saying that everything was over, to which Rushel nodded a little sadly in response. Looking after the team, Rushel told Alma that they were really good people, and that's why he didn't want them to die. Alma watched Rushel for a while and answered him that he understood everything and reminded him that it was time to move out. After some time, the whole team of Fletty was in front of the cave of the bandits' lair, hiding behind the bushes. Fletty quietly told everyone that the sun was almost set, and they needed to go to that shelter. Everyone in the team strongly agreed with him. Fletty looked into the bandits' lair, noticing 2 guards sitting on the ground. Fletty turned to his team and informed them that there were only 2 guards there, to which Rushel responded that she was a little nervous. Then Fletty, after thinking for a bit, informed everyone that they hadn't even had an ambush on the way here, but advised everyone not to lose their vigilance. While Fletty was thinking about the oddities watching the guards, at that time Rushel was sitting next to Fletty, whom none of the team had seen or noticed. Rushel, listening to Fletty's words, mentally said that he had dealt with the ambush. Invisible Rushel put on the skin of a precious chameleon, and this chameleon skin has a camouflage effect and allows one to hide the presence of a person. Rushel mentally apologized to Fletty and the entire team for secretly spying on them. He thought that maybe they didn't need it, but he still wanted to help. Fletty turned to his team, asking them about their condition. Mildy answered first, happily saying that she was in great shape, and Rushel, looking at her hands in the darkness of the forest, also answered that she could see so well in the dark. Listening to their words, the invisible Rushel happily thought that it was all because he used the black raven's egg, which gave him the skill of night vision. Then Fletty called Rushel, to which he quickly responded and ordered her to put the guards to sleep, because they were already sleepy. As ordered, Rushel used her magic staff and sent her magic, the beautiful song of the night lands, directly at the guards. Rushel's magic enveloped the guards, causing them to fall asleep out of nowhere. After putting the guards to sleep, Fletty and the entire team hurried to the entrance of the lair. Fletty praised Rushel and ordered everyone to go inside. Then Mildy joined in, decisively saying that this time they would return the relic. Watching what was happening, Rushel thought about his thoughts that his attack yesterday should alert the bandits, but everything seemed different. As they entered, the entire team stopped at the entrance, and Fletty told everyone that it was too quiet inside. Fletty looked around and asked in surprise that there was no one there. To which Rushel replied that there was a possibility that it was all a trap. At this time, Mildy suddenly called Fleddy, pointing to one place. Fleddy turned around and looked where Mildy pointed, and saw a group of bandits lying on their beds and sleeping peacefully in front of him. Fleddy was very surprised to see them, asking if they were all really sleeping. To which Mildy discontentedly called the bandits lazybones, and said that it infuriated her that such people stole the relic. Then Mildy suggested to Fleddy, saying that they could easily kill the bandits. To which Fleddy seriously answered her that they were taught not to point blades at sleeping people. But Mildy suggested, saying that suddenly they would wake up. Watching what was happening, Rushel became inspired by one of his ideas, and using his wind-shot magic, directed it into the sleeping room. At this time, the top of the cave began to crack and collapse. Fleddy, noticing the falling rocks from above, asked in surprise that it was a collapse. Nearby Mildy, noticing this, was also surprised and wary. But this collapse covered the entrance to the room of all the peacefully sleeping bandits. Awkwardly watching the pile of stones, Fleddy said nothing, and Mildy awkwardly commented that the bandits were covered. Rushel, looking happily at the pile of stones, thought that if they blocked the entrance like this, the bandits would not interfere with them. At this point, the entire team prepared for battle. Rushel told everyone that this was bad and was sure that this sound would definitely stir up all the bandits. Then Fleddy ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Rushel felt bad that he hadn't thought of this. The team pressed themselves against each other, drawing their swords, and for a few minutes, waiting for the bandits and preparing to attack, Fleddy's team stood in silence. Then Rushel awkwardly told everyone that everything seemed to be okay. Rushel asked, confused, if they were sleeping too deeply if it hadn't woken anyone up. To which the invisible Rushel sighed with relief, thinking that even though they were fighting, he still had to be careful. Then Fleddy thought about it, suggesting to everyone that they could fill up the other rooms as well, since the bandits weren't waking up. Then Fleddy called Garner, who quickly responded to the order, readying his big fist. Garner began to hit the ceiling of the cave with his bare hands, causing collapses. Rushel, watching this, was very surprised that Garner began to hit the ceiling of the cave with his bare hands. After Garner's attack, several more rooms were filled with rocks, blocking the entrance. The entire team went further forward, and then Fleddy praised Garner. Rushel was also surprised by Garner's strength. Walking quickly forward, Fleddy turned around and told his team that they would no longer be squeezed from both sides, and ordered everyone to move on. To which everyone in the team agreed with him, following the order. Running after the team, Rushel was glad that everything was working out for them. But now the leader of the bandits was waiting for them ahead. Walking further, Fleddy noticed someone in front and stopped in front of him, and the whole team stopped as well. In front of them sat the leader of the bandits, looking at them in surprise. Then holding his long sword, the bandit leader turned to them irritably, asking them who they were. And the bandit leader was also displeased that his subordinates were not looking anywhere. Then Fleddy stopped his team by blocking them with his hand and asking them to move away. To which his team looked at him in surprise. Fleddy seriously told his team that he would fight the leader alone, to which the leader of the bandits, not understanding, stared at them and said that he did not recognize them at first, and asked them if they were the knights. The bandit leader stood in front of Fleddy and swung his sword, threatening to ask him if he should cut off their arms and legs so that they would not appear. Fleddy, watching him, said that the bandit leader was wounded and asked him if he could fight, at which the bandit leader got very angry, cursing and saying that it was all because of the little boy. Then the bandit leader went on the attack first, shouting furiously that he needed to let off steam on someone. Fleddy was ready and also shouted at the leader to attack, calling him a magic swordsman. Then the leader of the bandits and Fleddy entered the battle. Fleddy and the bandit leader touched swords, attacking each other. The bandit leader attacked Fleddy with many powerful blows, but Fleddy did not lag behind, defending and attacking him. Mildy, Rushel, and Garner were rooting for their commander and shouting words of encouragement as they watched the battle. Also standing next to them was an invisible Rushel, worried about Fleddy. At this time, Fleddy attacked the leader's hand, which he held the sword with, causing the leader of the bandits to retreat back a few steps in defense. The bandit leader became even more angry and began to defend himself furiously, cursing and swearing against Fleddy's many attacks. Rushel watched their fight and thought that Fleddy was pushing the bandit leader back. The bandit leader was completely self-taught, while Fleddy was trained, so his technique was more precise, and the difference between a self-taught person and those who received good training was obvious. The leader of the bandits cursed, realizing that he was losing to Fleddy. Then the leader, defending himself from Fleddy's attack, shouted loudly, calling one of his bandits, and just as loudly said that they had enemies inside the cave. The leader of the bandits waited in silence, waiting for at least one of the bandits, but no one spoke up or came to help. Then Fleddy turned to the leader, telling him that there was no point in calling, because no one would come. The leader of the bandits became very angry and nervous, swearing and saying that no one had woken up since yesterday, and asked in confusion what was going on with them. After hearing his words, Rushel was surprised to think that the bandits had not woken up since yesterday, that is, since the moment he came. But after thinking a little, he finally understood. Rushel remembered yesterday, when he threw the branches of a sleeping tree into the cave and never took them with him. That's why the bandits are still sleeping. Rushel then looked at the rest of the team, thinking to himself why Fleddy and the others weren't sleeping then. Remembering all the details, Rushel finally understood. Rushel remembered that it was all because of the lettuce he put in the sandwich, because it has an invigorating effect, and that's why sleep didn't work on them. It was an accident, but Rushel was glad that it happened. At this time during the battle, the leader of the bandits clicked his tongue, angrily saying that if there was no help, and without finishing his sentence, the leader tightly gripped the hilt of the sword. Fleddy noticed this action and became wary. The bandit leader raised his flaming sword high with both hands and attacked Fleddy with a flaming hurricane, finishing his previous sentence by saying that he would incinerate everything himself. The rest of the team became worried about Fleddy, calling him and warning him. Fleddy stood there, focused, watching the fiery attack. Suddenly, Fleddy jumped straight into the flames of fire, not defending himself with anything or dodging. The leader of the bandits watched Fleddy and laughed happily, saying that Fleddy was crazy because he himself jumped into the fire. Then the leader of the bandits turned to Fleddy, saying that this flame would not leave even ashes from him. But watching Fleddy, the bandit leader was surprised to notice the unharmed Fleddy, who was heading straight towards him with his sword. Fleddy jumped, towering over the leader, and swung his sword at him. The leader of the bandits looked up and was very shocked to see Fleddy, and asked him how he did it. Fleddy at the same time attacked the leader with his sword. The bandit leader, taking the blow, lost consciousness and let go of his sword, which fell to the ground and fell back, landing. Then everyone else in the team rejoiced at Fleddy's win, rejoicing throughout the cave. The others approached Fleddy, and then Rushel worriedly asked Fleddy if he was hurt, to which Fleddy calmly replied that he was fine. Fleddy thought out loud, saying that it was strange that in such a strong flame he did not receive a single burn. Fleddy added that he would even say he didn't feel the heat. Rushel thought uncomfortably off to the side, doubting that Fleddy wouldn't expect to gain fire resistance from food. At this time, Mildy came up to Fleddy, happily saying that it was all thanks to the little angel who was looking after them. Fleddy smiled, agreeing with her and saying that Mildy was right. Rushel looked at them without understanding. Then the whole team turned to him without seeing him. And Fleddy called Rushel and said that he had helped them a lot, and someday they would definitely thank him. Rushel looked at them in surprise and remembered their faces when they said goodbye to him in the same way. Then he smiled and bowed before them, mentally saying that they did not need to thank him, because they had already done enough. Fleddy and the others left the forest, and Rushel returned to his normal life, but another event happened. 3 days later, Fleddy visited Rushel and greeted him. Rushel was very surprised to see Fleddy and asked him why he was there. Fleddy shook Rushel's hand in greeting and told him that they had managed to get the relic back, which meant that they had cleared their name and returned to their master. Rushel happily told him that he was happy for them, and thought to himself that he already knew. Then Fleddy continued, saying that someone wanted to meet Rushel and asked him if he would mind walking with him to the foot of the mountains, to which Rushel looked at Fleddy in surprise, wondering who it was. Following Fleddy, Rushel kept thinking about who it was, after which Fleddy led to the place where Rushel saw a carriage with everyone else nearby. Noticing them, Mildy, Rushel, and Garner stood, happily waving their hands, and calling Rushel to them. Then Rushel joyfully ran to them, calling them. And at that time, Mildy came forward to meet him, hugging him and saying that she missed him. Rushel discontentedly reproached Mildy, saying that only 3 days had passed. Fleddy walked up to them and told them all that he understood how they felt and reminded them that this was not what they were there for. Everyone nodded in agreement. and then suddenly everyone was kneeling down in front of the carriage entrance. Garner, who was sitting near the carriage door, opened it and 3 elves came out of the carriage. Among them was a middle-aged man, a young man, and a little girl. The adult elf looked at Rushel, asking everyone if this was the child. In front of the carriage stood Fletty and his team, and also the gentleman elves together with Rushel. The middle-aged elf man looked at Rushel with thoughtful eyes, examining him. Rushel looked at them with confusion, wondering who they were. Then the elf man raised his hands, directing them to Rushel, which made Rushel panic a little. But the male elf simply picked up Rushel, thoughtfully looking at him, and said that he understood everything. Rushel awkwardly asked the male elf who they were, to which the male elf, picking him up, smiled lightly at him. Then a young elf answered Rushel's question, introducing him to Clavis Gran Retivia and saying that he was the head of the Retivia family. The adult male elf sighed with annoyance and turned to Kareem and said that he should not take such an opportunity away from him. Having put Rushel down on the ground as an adult, the elf continued saying that he himself wanted to introduce himself as the head of the Retivia family and see how Rushel would be surprised. To which Clavis awkwardly asked him for forgiveness for the ruined opportunity. Rushel looked at the laughing Clavis Retivia in surprise and thought that this man was the head of the Retivia family. In other words, Fletty served him. Clavis Retivia approached Rushel, asking for the opportunity to introduce himself to him once again, and said that he was Clavis Gran Retivia, and he was the head of the Retivia family. Clavis Retivia bowed before Rushel, telling him that he had heard that Rushel had taken care of his knights and thanked him. Rushel felt awkward and stuttered to Clavis Retivia that he shouldn't. Clavis Retivia then pointed at Fletty, telling Rushel that Fletty had a strong sense of responsibility. Clavis Retivia continued by saying that Fletty ran away before he could stop him, telling him that he would give up his life to return the relic. Fletty blushed when he heard his master say that. Clavis Retivia told Rushel the crew's words that they almost lost one person, and Rushel was the one who helped them. At this time, Mildy was already embarrassed, awkwardly scratching the back of her head and smiling stupidly. Clavis Retivia addressed Rushel, saying that for the knights and for him, Rushel was a little savior. Kneeling down in front of Rushel, Clavis Retivia thanked Rushel, calling him a little hero. Then Clavis Retivia said that he wanted to reward Rushel and asked him if he wanted something that he wanted very much. To which Rushel awkwardly replied that he didn't need any reward and he just helped Fletty and the others because they were in a difficult situation. At that time, Clavis Retivia patted him on the shoulder, telling him that he was kind. Clavis Retivia addressed Rushel seriously, saying that Fletty told him about his situation, and that Rushel's parents abandoned him to survive in the mountains. Then Rushel stared in surprise at the words of Clavis Retivius. At this time, behind Fletty asked Rushel for forgiveness for telling about him, and added saying that the gentleman really wanted to know about Rushel. Clavis Retivia noted by saying that Rushel lived in such harsh circumstances, but did not lose the kindness in his heart. Then he praised Rushel by saying that he was a great fellow. Rushel awkwardly refused this, but Clavis Retivia, rising from his seat, addressed Fletty, saying that Rushel had refused the reward, and everything was as Fletty had said. To which Fletty replied with a smile that he knew Rushel would say so. Clavis Retivia turned to Rushel, asking him for a favor. Rushel turned around in surprise when he heard the word favor. Clavis Retivia then pointed to himself and asked him if he would move to his estate. At first, Rushel did not understand the question, and after several repetitions, he was very surprised, asking that he would go to the Retivia family estate, to which Clavis Retivia nodded in agreement. Rushel thought in his mind that the Retivia family was the Duke's family, and if the hierarchy had not changed in the last 300 years, then this was the highest rank of the aristocracy. Rushel then awkwardly asked the head of the family that this was the Duke's family and why him, to which Clavis Retivia answered him that everything was simple. Clavis Retivia told Rushel that there was only one reason why he wanted to invite him, and that was because he needed his power. Rushel asked in surprise about his powers. Then the head of the family said that he wanted to say everything straight. Clavis Retivia said that Rushel was an excellent healer and asked him if it was true that Rushel probably had medicine technology that they were not familiar with. Then Rushel was very surprised and in a panic, thinking that they had really understood everything. Rushel remembered how he had fed Fletty and the others monster food 3 times without warning them. First, It was the slime candy that Rushel used to heal Mildy's wounds. Then, he used another slime candy to restore Ruchel's magic power. And then, they gained fire resistance from the firebird's meat. Rushel tried to be careful that no one would find out that he was feeding them monsters. Rushel then asked the head of the family why they thought he was a healer. Then, a young elf approached him, saying that he would explain everything. The young elf introduced himself as Karim Gaban Rativia and politely told Rushel that he was pleased to meet him. Rushel reciprocated, thinking with admiration that Karim was the son of Clavis Rativia. Karim Rativia pointed to his magical eyes and said that he had used his appraisal magic, and a candy that Rushel had given to Fleddy and the others had both a strong pain-relieving and regenerating effect. But remembering Karim Rativia said that, however, when he asked to find something about this drug, there was no mention of this drug in any book. Karim continued saying that the same thing happened with the candy that Rushel gave to Rushel, and what was even more surprising was that thanks to Rushel's help, all four of them acquired the skill of fire resistance. So he and Clavis concluded that it was a very rare medicine, and to create such a medicine, one must have certain skills. Karim turned to Rushel, asking him if he now understood their train of thought. Rushel, having understood everything, mentally thought that they were absolutely sure of his strength and were trying to speak in such a way as not to frighten him. Rushel, looking at the Rativia family, thought that even though he had given their people strange medicines, it would not be surprising if they were hostile and wary, but they were the same kind people as Fleddy and the others. Then Rushel thought hopefully that maybe he could tell them about the monsters. Suddenly, Rushel turned to everyone and said that he wanted to show them something and asked them to wait for him here for a while. Rushel came back to the place where everyone was waiting for him, taking something with him and asking for forgiveness for making everyone wait. Rushel then placed a small slime on the ground in front of them. Rushel pointed at the slime and said with a smile that he had caught it and now he would show them a trick and asked everyone to watch carefully. Then Rushel noticed a little elf girl hiding behind Karim Rativi's cloak. Rushel smiled at her in a friendly manner, causing the little girl to smile as well, stepping out of the cloak a little. After that, Rushel pointed at the slime and said that he was starting. Rushel said that they all knew that the slime was a monster whose body was built around a core. So in other words, it was a monster with a magical core inside. Rushel continued saying that when a monster with such a core receives severe damage to its outer shell, its entire body disappears. Rushel began to lightly touch the slime, saying that there is one thing, but Rushel abruptly tore off a piece of slime and holding it in his hands, he said that if he did so, the slime would not disappear. Everyone in the team watching Rushel's actions were very surprised and sighed in disgust. Mildy asked Rushel in surprise how he did it, because the slime should have disappeared. Rushel also joined in, surprised, saying that at this point the core should have broken, and the body should have disappeared. Then Mildy curiously asked Rushel if the amoeba part was removed, would the slime disappear? To which Rushel replied that it wasn't quite like that. Rushel asked everyone to take a look and poke the slime with his finger. At this time, the slime on the ground burst in front of Rushel, disappearing from view. Rushel said that this is how, when the shell receives a certain amount of damage, the monster disappears. Rushel didn't know how to explain it exactly. But between the outer shell and the magic core, there is something like a thin tube through which magic power is transmitted. And if the magic power cannot circulate, the monster's body will disappear. It seems that the core has some kind of mechanism that triggers a self-destruct command. However, the circulation of magic power will not be disrupted. The core will not split, and the monster will not disappear. The entire outer shell will continue to exist. Karim Rativia thoughtfully observed that if you remove the monster's teeth, fangs, or scales while it is alive, it will not disappear. Clavis added that everything extracted is preserved and does not disappear because the core did not send a self-destruct command. At this time, Mildy happily asked Rushel that, in other words, she and Rushel ate a monster. Rushel was extremely surprised by this, and Rushel confirmed it, asking for their forgiveness for not telling them about it. Rushel held up some of the slime in his hands, showing it off and said that he made those candies out of slime, to which Mildy and Rushel started screaming in horror. Mildy was hysterical, screaming at everyone that she had eaten a monster. But Rushel awkwardly calmed her down, saying that everything was fine because he had boiled and sterilized it thoroughly, and added that they wouldn't even have an upset stomach. Then Rushel suddenly bit off a piece of slime, saying that you can even eat it raw. Mildy, not calming down, hysterically said that it was not even about that. Then Rushel lowered his head, sadly thinking about who would eat monsters at all. But suddenly he felt Clavis Retivius's hand on his head. Clavis Retivia praised Rushel, calling him a good fellow, and told him that Rushel was able to figure out such details of the nature of monsters, and he had talent, moreover. Rushel used the knowledge he found to survive, and he was truly amazed. Rushel looked at Clavis Retivius with a surprised look and thought that if his father had praised him like that, he would have felt the same. Rushel heard the clapping sounds of the little elf girl, looking at him with a smile and admiration. Everyone looked at her, also smiling at Rushel and supporting him. After that, Rushel asked to listen to him and told everyone that he was very sorry for keeping quiet and not telling them that he fed the monsters. To which Clavis Retivia responded by denying that it was actually different. Clavis Retivia said that he and Karim Retivia knew that this candy was made of slime. Rushel was very surprised by what he heard, and so were Mildy and Rachel. Rushel then awkwardly turned to Clavis Retivia, saying that it seemed like he and Karim Retivia knew a lot about monsters. Clavis Retivia explained to Rushel, saying that his Retivia family is a family of scientists, and as the head of the family, Clavis is researching monsters. Rushel at this time looked at Clavis with admiration and wondered that aristocrats were conducting research on monsters. Clavis Retivia continued saying that that was why he had concluded. Clavis continued by saying that the fire resistance that Fleddy and the others received was clearly not from the slime, and asked Rushel about how it was a different monster, to which Rushel thought in surprise that Clavis Retivia had already understood so much, as expected from a monster researcher. Rushel immediately answered Clavis's question with an affirmative, confirming this. Rushel said that it was all because they ate firebird meat for breakfast. Fleddy and the others were surprised by this information. Clavis thoughtfully said that these monsters are born in volcanoes, so if you eat their meat, you can get resistance to fire. Then, remembering something, he chuckled questioningly. Clavis turned to Fleddy and asked him if he had told Rushel that the bandit had used a magic sword. Fleddy shook his head. Fleddy said that Rushel shouldn't have known that he had a magic sword, and turning to Rushel, Fleddy asked him why he fed them that meat then, to which Rushel fell silent in surprise and said nothing. Fleddy turned to Rushel, calmly asking him if it was really he who put the bandits to sleep and how he did it, to which Rushel lowered his head, not knowing what to say. Noticing Rushel's reaction, Fleddy awkwardly said that he didn't blame him and that he was just surprised, to which Rushel simply remained silent, his head down. Everyone else looked at him, waiting for an answer, and were also surprised by this fact. Then Karim Retivia approached Rushel, calling him by name. Karim Retivia placed his hand on Rushel's head, asking for permission, and used his appraisal magic. Karim's eyes lit up with a white star symbol. Karim Retivia fully examined all of Rushel's magical abilities by examining him with his magic. Then Karim took his hand off Rushel's head and said that Rushel was most likely the strongest of them all. Everyone else was shocked by what they heard. Then Clavis Retivia turned to Rushel, asking him if he had gone through something that they did not yet know. Rushel, surprised and embarrassed, wanted to say, but could not because of fear. Then, trembling a little, Rushel thought that he no longer wanted to lie to these people and would tell them everything and return to the mountains. Having gathered himself, Rushel said that 3 years was a lie, and added that he had been living in these mountains for 300 years. Everyone there was very surprised by Rushel's words. They asked Rushel in surprise that he had really lived in these mountains for 300 years. Rushel did not answer them, simply lowering his head. Then Mildy started laughing loudly and jokingly asked Rushel what he was saying because it meant that Rushel was over 300 years old. Mildy happily said that Rushel didn't look like a grandfather at all. Then Karim Retivia looked at Rushel calmly and said that he was not lying. Everyone turned to him in surprise. Then Karim Retivia continued saying that among Rushel's skills there is the skill of immortality, and he got this power by eating monsters. Fleddy and everyone else in the team were surprised to hear the word immortality and looked at Rushel in shock. Rushel stood with his head down in shame. Rushel grabbed his chest in excitement and thought sadly that he had been exposed. But there was nothing he could do, and he didn't want to lie anymore. Rushel, with his head down, told everyone that he didn't want to hide it, because they simply wouldn't believe him anyway. Gradually moving a couple of steps back, Rushel sadly said that it would be better for him to return to the mountains. And abruptly turning back, he abruptly ran away, shouting words of farewell to them. But suddenly, Fleddy grabbed Rushel by the hands as he ran, stopping him. Rushel turned around in surprise, seeing Fleddy in front of him. Fleddy asked him to stop. Rushel looked at him in surprise, turning around. Then Clavis Retivia came up to them, calling Rushel by name. Clavis Retivia told Rushel that his proposal to invite Rushel to join them was originally Fleddy's proposal. Rushel then looked at Fleddy in surprise, asking him about it, to which Fleddy awkwardly responded with an affirmative. Clavis Retivia continued, recalling how Fleddy came into his office. Clavis Retivia said that when Fleddy told him about him, he offered him other help. After all, if Fleddy wanted to protect Rushel, then Clavis suggested that he give him to an orphanage under the auspices of the Retivia family. But Fleddy gave a different answer. Fleddy, in front of Clavis Retivia, then said decisively that the loneliness that Rushel had to face was much deeper than they thought and they did not understand it. Fleddy added saying that they all basically owed him a favor, and that's why he wanted Rushel to have a home. Clavis Retivia said that Fleddy convinced him. Rushel looked at Fleddy thinking that he did it for him. Clavis continued saying that he was skeptical at first. Clavis said that now that he had met Rushel in person, he completely agreed with Fleddy. After offering Rushel his hand, Clavis Retivia asked him again if Rushel would go with them. Rushel looked at Clavis for a moment and then lowered his head, thanking him for the offer and saying that he had lived in these mountains all his life and fed on monsters. Clenching his hands into fists, Rushel said that this is why he acquired various skills and lived for more than 300 years. Rushel sadly asked them if he didn't look like a monster to them. Everyone looked at him sadly, feeling sorry for him. Clavis Retivia looked at Rushel without saying anything and suddenly began to laugh loudly, causing Rushel to jump in fright. Clavis Retivia said with a smile that it was true that it was the first time he had seen someone like him. But even with his insane skills, Clavis would not dare to call Rushel a monster. Then Clavis Retivia addressed Rushel seriously, saying that he was still a child inside. Rushel was surprised by this answer. Clavis continued by saying that Rushel had lived alone all this time since he was a small child. Then he asked Rushel what he thought he had been able to grow spiritually. Standing in front of everyone, Rushel thought that Clavis Retivia was right, because as he grew older, Rushel would like to grow spiritually, but with age, he did not feel any changes. Rushel, remembering all his versions, thought that his body had gotten stronger, but in his soul he had not changed at all. He was still 8 years old. All his versions had not changed at all. At this time, a little girl who had been hiding behind Kareem's cloak all this time looked at Rushel a little sadly. Then Clavis Retivia extended his hand to Rushel, saying that he was not inviting him out of pity, but to help him. Extending his hand, Clavis asked Rushel what he thought. Looking at the outstretched hand, Rushel thought that Clavis looked like a kind person, and it didn't seem like he was lying to him. Rushel thought that if he took his hand, his 300 years of life in the mountains would end. But there was one thing. Rushel remembered Alma and thought about what would happen to him. Because if he left, Alma would be left alone in these mountains. At that moment, he heard Alma's voice in his head, telling him to go. Rushel suddenly turned around, noticing Alma, and ran towards her, calling his name. At this time, Karim Retivia, about to draw his sword, stood forward protecting his father and saying that it was a quar. Rushel turned around, noticing Karim Retivia's actions, and quickly stood up for Alma, asking her to stop and saying that this core was not evil. Fleddy also confirmed Rushel's words, saying that he was with Rushel. Clavis Retivia looked at Fleddy and told Karim that everything was fine and asked him to just watch, to which Karim put away his sword in agreement. Rushel knelt down on one knee and smiled at Alma, telling him mentally that everything was fine and he would not leave, because Rushel promised him to always be together. Then Alma mentally told Rushel that he could go. Rushel was surprised by his words, and Alma told him to leave these mountains, and he came to say it. Rushel asked Alma in surprise that he should leave, to which Alma agreed, saying that everything was exactly like that. But Rushel asked him the reason for this, not understanding. Then Alma looked at the others from behind and said out loud that he was tired of it, and asked that they could talk normally and not through telepathy. To which Rushel was a little scared by his words. Everyone else, hearing Alma's voice, was also shocked that Alma could talk. Alma blushed a little from such attention, and Rushel nervously looked at the others, not knowing what to say. Then Rushel stood up straight and pointed at Alma and began to deny this fact. But Rushel was interrupted by Clavis Retivia, who said that a talking monster was interesting. Clavis continued by saying that considering Rushel's skills, they shouldn't be surprised. Then he asked Rushel that Alma had come to talk, and asked Rushel not to distance himself from Alma. Rushel smiled gratefully at Clavis Retivia. At this time, Alma laughed a little, saying that this made everything easier. Alma turned to Rushel again, telling him to go with these people, to which Rushel excitedly asked Alma what would happen to him. Alma sighed slightly and winked and asked Rushel about what could be. And he said that he had been protecting an adult child for 300 years, and Alma could stand up for herself. Alma calmly told Rushel that he also wanted to live a carefree life, and Rushel had just received such an invitation. Alma turned to Rushel saying that if he left, it would be easier for both of them. Closing his eyes and pretending to drive away Alma, he told Rushel that if he understood everything, he would quickly move on. Mildy listened to Alma's words and became angry, asking what he was saying and how heartless Alma was. Rushel corrected her saying that Alma was not a dog. Then Rushel turned to Alma and said with a slight smile that when he lies, his ears start to twitch. To which Alma touched her ears in surprise, and the girls were surprised, watching Alma even more. Rushel told the worried Alma that he was worried about him. That's why he wanted him to leave. Rushel and Alma had been together for 300 years, and Alma wouldn't be able to deceive him. Alma stood in front of Rushel and addressed him, calling him by his name and asking him to understand him, because he also knows him and understands that he will refuse because of him. Alma remembered the past, saying that when Rushel met these people, Alma was once again convinced that Rushel, as the only person here, was lonely. Raising his eyes to Rushel, Alma said that this old man Clavis Retivia was right, because he needed friends and a family of people. Milda and Rushel looked at this scene with tenderness and sadness, thinking that it was lovely. At this time, Alma continued saying that this is why Rushel needed to go with them. Rushel listened to him silently, as did the others. Then Rushel approached Alma, offering him to go with him as well. But Alma calmly and directly refused. Alma told Rushel that if they found out that a monster was living in the city of people, there would be a lot of noise, and he could not go with him. Rushel, worried about Alma, answered him that he would be left all alone in this forest. Alma grinned, asking Rushel that he would be alone, and abruptly jumped up into the tree. Rushel raised his head and saw Alma in the tree with one more quar next to him. Alma happily reminded Rushel that he was now considered the local keeper, and he would look after the forest, help those who were in trouble. And Alma also happily reported that he even had a girlfriend. Alma looked at Rushel happily and told him that he would not have time to be alone, and asked Rushel not to worry about him and just move on. Rushel looked at Alma a little sadly. Then, lowering his head and wiping tears from his eyes, Rushel raised his head, looking at Alma with a smile and tears in his eyes, and nodded to him in agreement. Rushel thanked Alma very loudly, which made Alma smile. All the other people watching them smiled happily. Some time later, Rushel came to the others with all his things and apologizing for making everyone wait. He said that he had collected all his things. Kareem Retivia shook Rushel's hands, greeting him once more. Then Kareem nudged the little girl, calling her name. The little girl began to stutter out of embarrassment. Then the little girl bowed before Rushel and blushed, introduced herself to him saying that her name was Lilith Gran Retivia, and then greeted Rushel. After Lilith bowed, she quickly hid behind Kareem's cloak. Kareem awkwardly turned to Rushel, saying that Lilith had not yet gotten used to him. Clavis also asked for forgiveness, saying that Lilith was usually more active, to which Rushel awkwardly asked them not to apologize to him. Then remembering, Rushel said that he himself had not properly introduced himself. Then turning to everyone, Rushel said that his name was Rushel Hoff Tristan, and he was glad to meet them and apologize for the inconvenience. All the people, hearing the name of Rushel, were stunned by this. Then Karim Retivia, surprised, asked Rushel again that he had said the surname Tristan. Rushel looked around at everyone, confused. Then Clavis came up to him and said that everything was clear, because he was from the Tristan family, and now he understood why Rushel had to face such a harsh upbringing. Fletty nervously turned to Clavis, saying that if Rushel had the Tristan family lineage, but interrupting Fletty, Clavis told him not to worry, because he was not going to go back on his words. Calvis Retivia continued by saying that, on the contrary, he now understands exactly what Rushel had to go through. Then Rushel asked Clavis Retivia in confusion, saying that he didn't understand what Clavis was talking about, then asked him about what happened to the Tristan family. Clavis Retivia thought about it, putting his hands on Rushel's back. Clavis Retivia pushed Rushel further, saying that he had spent 300 years in the mountains and he would tell him everything. Approaching the carriage, Clavis, still leading Rushel, said that the story would be long and they would talk in the carriage. Right at the entrance to the carriage, Clavis stopped and told Rushel that he would speak on the way. Because many events had happened in the Tristan family over the past 300 years. The carriage was traveling along a winding road. Garner was driving the carriage, and Fleddy and the rest of his team were riding horses next to the carriage. Clavis, Kareem, and Lilith Retivia were sitting inside the carriage with Rushel. Clavis Retivia began his story by saying that the main event that happened in 300 years was a major conflict that involved many countries, and it was a major world war. Rushel sadly replied to Clavis that he did not know about it, to which Clavis Retivia replied that it was not surprising, since Rushel had been in the mountains all this time. Clavis Retivia continued by saying that the war was between humans, beastmen, elves, dwarves, and gnomes. The various races fought each other for 30 years. In such a long war, all the races were exhausted, and then the demons decided to take advantage of this. Hearing about the demons, Rushel said in surprise that he had read about them in books. Then Clavis explained that this is a race that has been hiding behind the scenes since ancient times and bringing chaos to this world. Clavis continued by saying that when all the nations were exhausted, the demons moved to attack, and it was as if they had been waiting for this moment. Then Rushel asked Clavis in surprise if the war between humanity and demons had really begun. Clavis Retivia agreed, telling Rushel that he was right. Clavis Retivia said that it turned out that the conflict between all the races was provoked by demons, and everything went according to their plan. And when everyone learned the truth, it was decided to unite against the demons. But humanity was powerless against the power of the demons. Very worried, Rushel asked Clavis about what happened to the Tristan family, then suggested that the demons had really exterminated them all. But Clavis interrupted his bad thoughts by denying this, and said that everything was the opposite. Clavis Retivia continued by saying that the Sword Saint was the only one who was stronger than the demons, and he inspired the people and became their hope. Hearing this, Rushel was very surprised by the Sword Saint. Then Rushel happily said that, judging by the past, this was a descendant of his father, and he was glad that the Tristan family had become a hope for humanity. Then Clavis Retivia looked at Rushel for a moment and closed his eyes in worry. Clavis called Rushel by name and told him that, unfortunately, things were not that simple. To which Rushel looked at Clavis Retivia in surprise. Clavis Retivia said that one Sword Saint could not change everything globally because of the overwhelming power of the demons. Humanity's strength was becoming less and less every day. Clavis Retivia looked down, recalling the events of the past, and said with disappointment that at the most fateful moment, the Sword Saint of the Tristan family had joined the demons. Rushel was shocked by this information. In Clavis Retivia's memories, the Sword Saint of the Tristan family, along with all the demons, attacked the city and killed all the people, leaving no one alive. Rushel was very desperate and disappointed, muttering about the Sword Saint and the Tristan family, saying that this could not be. Clavis Retivia then calmly answered him that he did not know why this had happened. Then he added, saying that, however, after the loss of the Holy Sword, humanity had come to an end. Clavis Retivia said that following the Sword Saint, more and more people began to side with the demons. Rushel then excitedly asked Clavis what had happened to those who had sided with the demons, to which Clavis Retivia replied that they did not know the details. Clavis Retivia said that the Sword Saint created a kingdom among the demons, and far beyond the sea lies the kingdom of Tristan. Having lost the Holy Sword, humanity began to yield in military power to the demons. Everyone thought that there was no longer a chance of victory, but humanity had an unexpected ally. The Holy Spirit Liamine descended from the sky. She looked divinely beautiful, with long, fair hair. With her colossal power, humanity was able to recover quickly. As a result, the demons were exterminated, and peace came to the entire earth. The kingdom of Tristan was surrounded by a barrier and is still watched by the entire world. Some say that the demons there are still waiting for a chance to take revenge and treat the people trapped there as slaves. After hearing the whole story from Clavis Retivia, Rushel was silent for a moment. Then, with his head down, he asked Clavis about when he heard the name Tristan, why he didn't just leave Rushel there. Karim and Lilith Retivia looked at Rushel with sadness. Then Clavis Retivia answered Rushel that he was not to blame for anything. But even so, it would be better to hide Rushel's pedigree from the others. Rushel wanted to object to Clavis Retivia, but Clavis interrupted Rushel and said that it was not only about what people would feel, but there was another reason. And that reason was that demons could use Rushel's power. Hearing Clavis's words, Rushel thought that it was true that the Tristan family was now against humanity, and if they found out that their blood relative had returned, they might try to lure Rushel over to their side. Rushel thought about the worst cases, that then, in the worst case, he could point the blade at the people who were now next to them, and he did not want that. Clavis Retivia said that demons cannot reproduce, but they are immortal and very cunning, because it is said that demons have already managed to get out of the barrier, and are already plotting behind the scenes. Clavis Retivia advised Rushel, saying that it would be wise to hide his identity so as not to stand out, to which Rushel immediately agreed with him. And then Clavis Retivia, looking out the window, told Rushel not to worry, because they would protect him. At this time, they had already arrived at Retivia's house. Clavis Retivia greeted Rushel by pointing to his house. The next day, Rushel woke up, gradually opening his eyes. Fully awake, Rushel sat on the bed, looking around his room in the daylight. Rushel looked at the window and remembered that he was now living in the house of the Retivi family, and he had already gotten out of the habit of sleeping in such a bed. Rushel remembered Clavis Retivius's words yesterday that he would introduce everyone later, and asked to rest now. Rushel remembered Clavis Retivius's words, but he could not sit still. Then, changing his clothes and taking his bag of things with him, Rushel went outside and stretched in the morning sunlight. At this time, Rushel noticed a stack of logs in front of him. They were neatly stacked. Rushel took one log from the stack and walked further down the street. Rushel was looking around the streets, and then he stopped and broke a log into several pieces, and lit a fire with his magic. On top of the fire, Rushel put a large kettle of water to boil. Rushel sat in front of the fire and thought about his own. Rushel thought about how Clavis told him not to use his power just like that, so as not to attract the attention of the demons, and this was for his own safety. Rushel then thought that, on the other hand, if they were in danger because of him, he would use his power without hesitation. At this time, Rushel heard a female voice calling his name. Rushel saw Rushel approaching, who was dressed in a maid's costume. Rushel adjusted her glasses with displeasure and told Rushel that she was looking for him everywhere. Then Rushel, noticing her new clothes, asked her what was wrong with her clothes, to which Rushel, slightly distracted, looked at her suit and replied that she served the Retivia family. Rushel spun around looking at her dress and told Rushel that she asked the gentleman to make this dress for her, and then she asked Rushel if her dress was strange. Rushel denied it, saying that the dress suited her very well. Rushel, having bragged a little, proudly raised her head and, as if nothing had happened, said that she was glad and would continue her speech. Rushel suddenly made a heart shape with her hands and firmly told Rushel that from today on she would take care of him, and her name was Rushel Vig. Then asked Rushel to rega, then asked Rushel to rely on her, to which Rushel was very surprised and embarrassed. Rushel awkwardly answered her that she did not need to take care of him, and then added, saying that it was not visible from the outside, but inside he was already an old man. Hearing his words, Rushel asked very displeasedly what happened, and in confirmation, asked that Rushel had lived in the mountains for all these 300 years. She said very displeasedly that Rushel knew nothing about the city, about etiquette and about local language standards, and Rushel had a lot to learn, to which Rushel, frightened, began to stutter and agree with her. Then Rushel put his hand on his head, stroking Rushel on the head with a smile. She said that, besides, in these 300 years, Rushel had not been able to experience the joys of childhood, and there was nothing wrong with being a child. Rushel continued by saying that it was natural for them, adults, to create a happy childhood for a child. Rushel calmly asked Rushel if he understood everything now, to which Rushel happily agreed and thanked Rushel for everything. Rushel stood up and said directly that this was all great, of course. Then, looking around, Rushel said with displeasure that there should have been another person here, to which Rushel was surprised by what he heard. Mildy, dressed in the same clothes as Rushel, calmly approached Rushel and Rushel, yawning as she went and wishing everyone a good morning. Rushel greeted her cheerfully by name. Rushel began to scold Mildy, asking her discontentedly what kind of example she was setting for Rushel. To which Mildy happily replied that she could do nothing about it, because it was hard for her to wake up in the morning. Mildy approached Rushel by tickling his face with her tail and asking him if he was mad about it. To which Rushel angrily told Mildy not to try to bribe him with her tail. Mildy ignored Rushel and noticed a small fire with a kettle on top, and curiously asked what it was. To which Rushel, moving Mildy's tail to the side, replied that he drank it every morning in the mountains. Then, checking the kettle, Rushel asked the girls if they wanted to try it, to which Mildy was the first to actively respond, saying that she wanted to. Rushel thought irritably to herself that Mildy was a restless fox. Rushel rummaged through his bag, pulled out some ingredients, and showed them, saying that he would use them. Mildy and Rushel looked at Rushel's hands, which contained baked beans, and were surprised by this. Then Rushel suddenly threw the baked beans high up in the air. Then, using his magic powers, he began to break them into pieces, saying it out loud. Rushel then collected all the broken parts of the beans in a small cotton bag. Rushel poured boiled water into a transparent teapot through the cotton bag with the beans and began to brew it. Rushel then filled the teapot with hot water again. After brewing, Rushel poured liquid into each glass. Mildy said admiringly that it had a very beautiful color. Rushel poured 3 cups of liquid and happily said that everything was ready. Then Rushel started to rummage through his bag, saying that he would get something. At this time, Rushel held a glass of liquid in front of him and quietly whispered to Mildy that the smell was pleasant and the color was black, as if coal had been added to the water. Mildy also awkwardly and very quietly answered Rushel that after all, Rushel had prepared it for them, and they should try it. Taking the glasses, Rushel and Mildy tried the liquid by swallowing, after which, with a suffering face, they said very loudly that it was very bitter. Mildy, having calmed down a bit, turned to Rushel and said that the smell was pleasant, but the taste was bitter. To which Rushel happily rummaged through his backpack. Rushel took sugar and milk out of his bag and told Mildy that in that case sugar and milk could be added. Then Rushel asked Rushel in surprise that he could fit all of it in his bag. After some time, Rushel added milk and sugar to her glass and showed it to Rushel and asked him if she was doing it right. Rushel nodded in agreement. After adding some milk and sugar to their mugs, Mildy and Rushel awkwardly tasted the liquid again. But after tasting, Rushel and Mildy were silent for a moment, surprised. Then they looked at each other happily, saying loudly that it was very tasty. Rushel told Rushel in surprise that the bitterness was not so strong now, and it was very easy to drink. Mildy, in surprise, asked Rushel about this drink that was drunk 300 years ago. To which Rushel shook his head and said that for 300 years only he drank it, and this drink was called coffee. Then Rushel was very surprised by the name of the drink, asking if these were really coffee beans. Mildy, not understanding, asked what it was. Rushel began to reproach Mildy with displeasure, saying that she should at least read useful books sometimes. To which Mildy awkwardly replied that when she began to read a book thicker than a restaurant menu, she began to feel sleepy. After this, Rushel explained to everyone that coffee beans are a type of magical plant, and they say that from one such bean, magical power grows. Then, lowering her voice a little, Rushel said that coffee beans were very expensive, like jewels, to which Mildy was surprised by this information. Then, at the same moment, both of them thought that Rushel had ground these rare beans into dust. Rushel, noticing Mildy and Rushel's awkward look, asked them if he had done anything bad, to which Rushel awkwardly replied that that was not the point. After that, Rushel calmed down and asked Rushel about what he said, that he drinks it every day. Then she awkwardly said that even 1 grain increases magic power, and if he drinks it every day, and did not let him finish the sentence. Then Rushel calmly answered her that he had already drunk so much that his magic power was not growing. To which Mildy was very surprised, and Rushel asked Rushel how much magic power he had. After drinking, Rushel smiled, sighing pleasantly and saying that everything was delicious. And now it was time to clean everything up. Rushel and Mildy watched as Rushel calmly poured the rest of the coffee and the remaining beans directly onto the ground, causing Rushel to scream in surprise, thinking that for Rushel, rare beans were disposable. Noticing this, Rushel turned to Rushel and asked for forgiveness, saying that he really shouldn't throw it out in the garden like that. To which Rushel awkwardly replied that that wasn't the issue. Then Rushel used his magic to destroy the remains of the rare beans that were lying on the ground, happily saying that it was easy to get rid of it. To which Rushel began to scream even more from what she saw. Rushel and Mildy were on all fours, looking in despair at where the rare beans lay until Rushel destroyed them. Looking at them, Rushel awkwardly asked them if he had done something bad again. To which Rushel awkwardly answered him that it was not about that. Then Rushel awkwardly turned to Rushel asking to listen to her and said that these beans are very rare. Rushel asked in surprise that the beans are rare, after which Rushel grabbed his bag and turned it down, causing the rare coffee beans to fall out in large quantities. Rushel calmly told everyone not to worry, because he had brought a whole bunch of them from home. Mildy and Rushel were very surprised by such a large number of rare beans and simply fell silent from surprise. Noticing their reaction, Rushel asked them again about whether he had definitely done something bad, to which Rushel answered that this was not the case. Suddenly, all three heard someone's voice calling for help. All three turned around sharply, looking at the house and saw Lilith screaming there, calling for help for her mother. And all three quickly ran to Lilith. View of the Retivia family's house. Questioning cries are heard. Someone is calling for Mrs. Lilith. Rushel, Mildy, and Rushel are running towards the house. Lilith comes out to meet them. She is trying to call her mother, but her strength is leaving her, and she begins to faint. Suddenly, a gray-haired man in a tailcoat and pince-nez catches the falling Lilith, preventing her from hitting the ground. The man's sudden maneuver causes dust to rise around her. Lilith is unconscious. She runs out into the street barefoot, and in only her nightgown. Rushel, Mildy, and Rushel, who were also running towards Lilith, scream in surprise. They did not expect the gray-haired man to appear. Lilith was caught by a man named Vanson. Mr. Vanson, holding young Lilith in his arms, tells Rushel, Rushel, and Mildy, who ran up to him, that the lady is having an attack. All three are surprised. Vanson gives the orders. He tells Rushel to take care of the treatment and sends Mildy for medicine. Both girls jump up and run off to do Vanson's bidding. Gray-haired Vanson is still holding young Mrs. Lilith in her arms. She came to, opened her eyes, and recognized Vanson. He tells her that everything is fine and notices Rushel nearby, who did not run away with Rushel and Mildy, but stayed where he was. Vanson and Lilith, who has come to their senses, look at Rushel. Vanson greets him and introduces himself as the head butler of the Retivia family estate. He politely says that he is glad to meet him. Rushel is surprised but also responds politely. Butler Vanson puts Lilith down and covers her. He tells her that he is sorry but she must stay outside with Rushel for now. Lilith is surprised but agrees with the butler. Rushel stands nearby, surprised too. Suddenly, the butler jumps up and runs away, leaving Rushel and Lilith alone in the courtyard, shocked by his speed. Rushel is lost in thought. Lilith at this time looks into space, lost, clutching the blanket that was covered her with her hand. Rushel asks if she is okay. Lilith turned to face Rushel. She apologizes, because what happened made her lose her head, and she was too upset. She looks sad, but Rushel does not understand what she is talking about. Suddenly, a terrible scream came from the second floor of the house where Rushel and Lilith were standing. Both children raised their heads in fear. This scream shocked them. Lilith told Rushel that her mother was screaming. Lilith clutched the blanket that was wrapped around her shoulders. Lilith's mother had been ill for a long time, but no doctor they had ever seen could help her. Lilith cries. Her face is red. Every time her mother has a fit, she suffers a lot. And Lilith worries that at these moments she can't help her mother. Lilith covers her face with her hands and continues to cry. She and Rushel are still on the street in front of the house. Rushel is silent for a few minutes and calls her name. Rushel grabbed Lilith's hand and said he wanted to try something, but he needed her help to do it. Lilith stopped crying and looked at Rushel in surprise. Meanwhile, in the house, Mildy tries to give the mistress a healing potion in a bottle, but she knocks the bottle away from Mildy with a sharp swing of her hand. Mildy screams from the blow, and the bottle with the potion flies away. A view from above of the mistress's chambers. The servants and her family stand near the large canopy bed. They are all trying to calm the mistress down, to contain her violence. Things and dishes are scattered nearby. Rushel with her staff is trying to use magic to contain the mistress's attack. A terrible, inhuman scream cuts through the mistress's chambers again, her body writhing in terrible convulsions, and her body seems to be enveloped in dark flames. The mistress's eldest son and husband are screaming. They are worried about her health and condition. The butler, still holding the mistress's hands as she lies on the bed, screams and asks Mildy to bring more potion, and asks Mildy to bring more potion, and asks Rushel to use more powerful healing magic. Rushel holds her staff out in front of her, and holds it with both hands, trying to stop her mistress's attack with her magic, but that's her limit. Rushel closes her eyes, finding it hard to hold back her mistress's attack. Suddenly, someone extended a hand towards the lady lying on the bed and directed a stream of magic onto her body. The people around stared at the glow in shock, and the lady's husband and son seemed very surprised. It turned out that the flow of magic was created by Rushel. He jumped forward and is now standing next to the surprised Rushel, helping her with his magic. A bright glow of power spreads around, and Rushel's face expresses concentration. The eldest son and the husband of the lady struggling with the attack are extremely surprised by Rushel's actions. They thought it was a spell of great healing, but it is probably something more powerful. Rushel, with a serious and collected look, continues to direct a stream of magic at the mistress, a bright light spreading around him. He used the advanced spell Angel's Prayer. The mistress has calmed down a bit, but the servants are still holding her. The mistress lets out a tortured groan. Rushel, still holding the staff, thinks that the attack has subsided, but Rushel knows that is not enough. They both continue to direct streams of magic onto the mistress's body. Rushel suddenly and loudly gives Lilith the command to act. The young lady abruptly runs into her mother's room and throws off her blanket, rushing to the bed. Her father and brother are very surprised by her appearance. Both simultaneously shout her name. In front of the astonished servants and relatives standing by the bed of the mistress, Lilith jumped onto the bed and kissed her mother. The mistress's body stopped twitching. She became quiet. She felt better. Everyone standing around the bed held their breath, waiting for the result. Their faces expressed shock and, at the same time, anticipation. Lilith finished kissing her mother and pulled away slightly, view from above onto a large canopy bed. The mistress lies in the middle. She is no longer screaming, and the servants sitting on the sides of the bed no longer hold her body from an attack. Lilith sits next to her mother. The mistress's husband and eldest son stand near the bed. Lilith looks at her mother with hope. She waits. Suddenly, her mother stretches out her hand to her. The lady opens her eyes and sees Lilith. She recognizes her and calls her by name. Lilith is happy. She cries and calls her mother. The lady hugs the crying Lilith. Then she noticed people standing nearby. She recognized her husband and her eldest son, Karim. Both men are surprised, but very happy that the attack is over. The lady's name is Sophony. She apologizes to those around her for always worrying about her. Sophony's husband, Clavis, calms her down. He is glad that the attack is over and that Sophony has calmed down. Karim, Lilith's brother, asks her in surprise what happened and what she did. Lilith, who is not yet fully recovered from her experiences, wipes the tears from her eyes and looks at her older brother. Lilith turned around and said loudly that it was all Rushel's doing. At this time, Rushel stood quietly next to Rushel, who looked at him in amazement and clutched her magic staff. Rushel took out a small bag and informed the assembled that he had given Mrs. Sophini a small healing mucus candy. Rushel held the candy in his palm, looking at Rushel with the candy. The assembled group expresses a whole range of emotions. Karim is surprised. Clavis is thoughtful. The butler and Lilith are smiling. Mrs. Sophini covers her face with her hand in shock, and Mildy seems to remember how she ate such a candy herself. Rushel seriously explains to those gathered that he himself once had the same symptoms a long time ago, and he controlled them with the help of the same candy. The head of the Clavis family thoughtfully rubs his chin and says that Rushel fulfilled his request with his actions before he knew it. Rushel is surprised. He understands what request he is talking about. Suddenly, Rushel remembered his conversation with the head of the Retivia family, Clavis, and his companions, which took place in the forest during their first meeting. He realized that Clavis had said something about his strength. Clavis confirms this. Looking at Rushel, he says that he originally wanted Rushel to help him heal Clavis's wife, Sophini. At this time, Sophini sits on the bed and listens to their conversation. Clavis added that he had not invited Rushel to the estate only for this reason. He really wanted to get to know him better and help him. But deep down, he wanted Rushel to cure Sophini as soon as possible. Rushel happily slaps Rushel on the back as a sign of approval. She is happy. And Clavis, closing his eyes and slightly bowing his head to Rushel, asks how he can thank him. Rushel is embarrassed and does not know what to say. Coming to his senses, Rushel sheepishly claims that he doesn't need anything from Rativia's family and Clavis. He's just glad he could help. Clavis stares at him silently, but Rushel has something to add. Rushel tells Clavis that the candy only suppressed the symptoms of the attack in the lady for a while, and that if they are taken constantly, then the body of Mrs. Sophini will get used to them, and they will stop helping. Clavis is shocked. Rushel, standing in front of the bed of the mistress, who is surrounded by servants and relatives, tells those gathered that the illness of Madame Sophini is not yet cured. Sophini, sitting in bed, looks at Rushel. It seems she is afraid. The face of the head of the Rativius family, Clavis, expresses extreme shock. He does not understand how this is possible, and why Sophina's illness has not been cured. His son Karim is also surprised, but says nothing. Then Sophini speaks. Sitting up in bed, she quietly calls her husband and tells him that it is true. Clavis does not understand what she means. Then Sophini sadly says that she feels something else in her chest. Lilith, Karim, and Clavis listen to her silently. Clavis chuckles worriedly. Karim says that the mother's condition is stable now. At the same time, all of them, including Lilith, look anxiously at Sophini. Mrs. Sophini is silent and smiles slightly, but her face expresses sadness. At this point, Rushel calls Clavis and asks him for permission to examine Mrs. Sophini. He is confident and wants to help. The servants are still standing near the bed where Sophini is sitting, and the relatives are nearby. Clavis does not mind Rushel examining Sophini, but says that he has already used the assessment skill many times and still has not found the cause of the illness. Then Rushel decides that in this case he will use his dragon vision skill to assess Mrs. Sophini's condition. His eyes suddenly changed, and his pupils became vertical. Karim and Clavis are very surprised, because dragon vision is a legendary skill, much stronger than the appraisal skill. This rare skill can only be obtained by making a contract with a dragon. Rushel came very close to Mrs. Sophini's bed. Lilith stands next to him, and Karim and Clavis stand behind him. Rushel apologizes to Sophini for intruding. By activating the dragon vision skill, Rushel saw all of Sophina's stats, including her race, age, special skills, magic power, stamina, agility, intelligence, and luck level. And her condition was marked as sick. Rushel realized that he had seen what could be known with a simple assessment, but with his dragon sight, he could see much more and go much further. He increased the influence of dragon sight on Sophini. Suddenly, Sophina's status card changed, and instead of malaise, Rushel saw a previously hidden status, which stated that the subject was under a high-ranking curse, suppressed by a sedative, but there was a risk of death. Rushel once again enhanced the dragon vision, directing it to obtain data on the high-ranking curse cast on the subject. He needed details. The subject's status card changed again, and Rushel saw the information that when the curse was cast on the subject, a cursed dragon weapon or a weapon of equivalent power was likely used. Rushel finished. He closed his eyes for a moment. He understood everything. He seriously informed those present that most likely the same curse had been cast on Mrs. Sophini as on himself. The dragon curse. Lilith asked again in horror, and the rest of the people surrounding the mistress's bed stood in shock and silence, not knowing what to say in response to the diagnosis they had heard from Rushel. Clavis asks Rushel if the curse can be lifted if the one who cast it can be found. Rushel does not know the answer to this question, but he knows that even a caster cannot lift the dragon curse. Clavis is horrified. Karim remains silent. Suddenly, Karim screamed, asking Rushel to give an answer. After all, Rushel himself was also under the influence of this curse and, probably, he was able to remove it somehow. Karim's face expresses hope for Rushel's answer. Rushel immediately confirmed Karim's words. He was indeed under the influence of the dragon curse, and he knew how to remove it. Clavis hesitantly asks if this is true. Rushel confirms again. Clavis is very excited. He rushes to Rushel and asks what needs to be done for this. That is what they, the Retivia family, can do. Rushel is ready to give important information as soon as he collects his thoughts. Rushel, with a very serious look, tells Clavis and Kareem that in order to lift the curse, they need to ask a huge dragon to dispel this curse. Rushel thought. That's how he lifted his curse, and there is one dragon who can listen to him. Clavis and Lilith look at Rushel with hope and wait for him to finish his thoughts. But Rushel knows there is one problem. Rushel reports that the problem is that this dragon, although it can help, is only interested in very strong people. And if you don't challenge it to a fight, the dragon simply won't help. The people in the room are all in shock because they don't understand how it's possible to fight a dragon one-on-one to get his help. Rushel continues to think out loud, saying that he can try to help, but there is a high probability that the dragon will run away or freak out upon seeing him. Mildy, shocked, asks what Rushel did to the dragon. Clavis's face sank. Even though they had found out how to lift the curse on his wife, there was no guarantee that they would be able to defeat the dragon. It was too dangerous. At this point, Sophony, who had been silent, spoke up. She assured her husband that everything was fine and that she was glad, even if they had only found a temporary cure. After all, they couldn't expose their people to such danger just because of her. Sophony looks at her husband through her tears and smiles. She thinks that this is enough for her. She is grateful to them all. Clavis and Lilith are amazed. Rushel thought again. He is sure that fighting a dragon is clearly not an easy way, and that there are very few people in this world who are capable of fighting a dragon. Here Kareem turns to his mother and father. He is calm and confident. He has decided that he will go fight the dragon himself. Rushel and Mildy scream in surprise, but Clavis is against it. He cannot let Kareem go, because he is the heir of the Retivia family, and if something happens to Kareem, the family line will be interrupted. Kareem obviously expected this answer, so he immediately counters by asking his father if he really wants his son to be the one to abandon his mother in danger. Mrs. Safini looks up in surprise and looks at her husband and son. Clavis is shocked. He tries to reason with his son. But Kareem is adamant. He assures his father that he will definitely return alive. Clavis realized that he cannot stop Kareem. Clavis quickly walked up to his son and put his hand on his shoulder. He agrees to let him go and asks Kareem to save his mother. Kareem smiles slightly and looks at his father with confidence. Kareem excitedly tells everyone present that he will definitely save his mother. He wants to earn the title of hero. Sophony is amazed by her son's courage and cries, sitting in bed and listening to his fiery speech. Clavis asks the butler Vonson to find and call Fleddy, and Kareem also adds something to this request. The butler bows to the gentleman. Rushel is thinking about Kareem's words at this time. The title of hero is given to a person who is almost equal in strength to the Sorn of the Saint of the Sword. Rushel knew that Kareem was an educated young man, but he did not think that he knew about the title of hero. Suddenly, Rushel was distracted from his thoughts by some movement. It was Lilith. She had been silent all this time and stood to the side, listening to the adults' conversation. Lilith looked sad and thoughtful. She suddenly turned around and began to leave. Rushel saw Lilith slip out the door, and neither her brother, nor her father, nor any other people noticed her. Only Safini noticed something. But Lilith was no longer in the room. Only Rushel, who immediately rushed after her. Rushel smiled at Mrs. Safini, who was looking at him worriedly, and mentally he told her not to worry, because he was with Lilith. Rushel runs through the corridors of the Retivia family home, seeing Lilith run into one of the doors. When he got there, he saw steps going down. Rushel goes down, and suddenly he sees a bright light in the doorway. It seems Rushel saw something amazing. View of various plants in pots, palms, flowers, and small trees. There are a lot of plants. Rushel's gaze really fell upon something amazing. It was a whole greenhouse of plants. All sorts of plants stood on the floor in tubs, in pots on shelves. Plants even hung from the ceiling. Rushel was amazed by the beauty of the place and looked around. Rushel started looking around. He was surprised by how many medicinal and magical herbs there were. He walked along the rows of plants and suddenly saw something ahead. In the middle of the room with the plant collection, there is a table where Lilith is sitting, crying, her face buried in her hands. There are also plants and papers on the table. Rushel watches her silently for a few moments. Then Rushel decides to break the awkward silence and notices that all these plants around are probably well looked after by someone. Lilith jumped up in fright. She did not expect to see someone. There are tears in Lilith's eyes. To start a conversation, Rushel confidently lists the plants he sees and adds what each of them helps with. All these plants are medicinal, but also very beautiful. Rushel, standing nearby, apologizes to Lilith for entering without permission. He asks if all the plants in the hall belong to Lady Lilith. Lilith has stopped crying and sadly confirms that all the plants are hers. There are a lot of pots with flowers and plants around her. She grew them all to help her mother. However, all her efforts were in vain. Lilith now knows that she cannot lift the curse with only the help of plants. Lilith remembers how Rushel helped her mother. She considers him amazing, because he immediately understood the reason for her suffering, and even told how to remove the curse placed on her. Lilith continues and remembers the face of her older brother Kareem, who was ready to risk his life to help their mother. And she is sure that he will definitely be accompanied by knights. She clenches her fists and worries that everyone around her is trying for her mother and only Lilith can do nothing for her. Lilith is about to cry again. A view from above of the hall with plants. At the table where the papers are, Lilith sits crying from helplessness. She considers herself simply useless. Rushel stands silently nearby and collects her thoughts to say something. Rushel looks at Lilith and says that she is wrong. Lilith raises her head in surprise and looks at him, tears in her eyes. Rushel spread his arms in admiration, as if pointing to the beautiful hall with plants. He assures her that she has done a great job of growing, caring for, and combining the plants with each other, that she has put in a lot of effort to help her mother. Rushel smiles and looks at Lilith and says that he too has grown a lot of things in the mountains, and therefore understands how difficult it is. Lilith looks at him in shock, inspired by the praise. Rushel turned to the plants and told Lilith that he had the experience and knowledge he had acquired over the long years of living in the mountains, but he could not have done the same at Lilith's age. Rushel especially notes the herb called rulala. He leans over a pot with an unusual plant with large buds and examines them. Rushel says that this unusual herb is very difficult to grow because it constantly dries out. In principle, it must be grown very carefully. Rushel believes that Mrs. Lilith has put incredible efforts into growing it. Rushel holds a pot of rulala grass and tells Lilith that there is a belief in the ability of this grass to fulfill people's wishes. Rushel likes being among plants. Rushel smiled and handed a pot of rulala grass to Lilith, who was sitting opposite her. Rushel was sure that this grass had definitely heard her wish to help her mother. Lilith stopped crying and looked at Rushel, fascinated. Tears of gratitude welled up in Lilith's eyes. She took the pot of rulala grass from Rushel's hands. She was pleased with his words, but Rushel wanted to tell her something else important. He offers to help the rulala grass fulfill Lilith's wish with a smile, and he is ready to help her for this. Lilith looks at him in surprise. She does not yet understand what exactly Rushel means by help. Evening. The action moves to another part of the Retivia family's house. This is the kitchen. Two cooks, a human and an elf, ask someone in surprise about his desire to use the kitchen tonight. It turns out that Rushel needs the kitchen. He asks for permission, but the cooks refuse him. After all, there are many sharp objects in the kitchen, and you can also get burned. Rushel is standing in the kitchen in front of the cooks. One cook is younger. He is an elf, and he is hesitant. The other cook is older. He is a human. He does not want to let Rushel use the kitchen. The kitchen is clean and has good furniture. Rushel tries to say something else, but one of the cooks starts pushing him away, saying that it's high time for the children to go to bed. Suddenly, another man entered the kitchen, his hands crossed behind his back. He asks what is going on. The Provar elf holds Rushel by the scruff of the neck and is ready to throw him out. The cooks and Rushel are surprised to see the man enter. A man in a tall hat entered the kitchen. It was the chef. He was already very old, but dressed neatly. The cooks were surprised. The elf cook began to justify himself to the chef, saying that Rushel wanted to use the kitchen. The chef chuckled thoughtfully. He asks Rushel if he is a guest of the Retivia family. Rushel confirms that he is. He introduces himself to the chief and gives his name, his appearance expressing confidence in his actions. The elderly chef looks at Rushel carefully. His name is Sonko, and he is the one in charge of the kitchen in the Retivia family's house. Rushel respectfully asks the chef for permission to use the kitchen, but the old chef shakes his head. He cannot allow it. Chef Songko narrows one eye, holds up two fingers, and tells Rushel that he has two reasons for this. Chef Songko can't let Rushel use the kitchen. Firstly, because he is a guest of the Retivia family, and Songko can't let Rushel work as a servant. Also, Rushel might get hurt. Rushel is upset. And secondly, Sanho says that this kitchen is used to prepare food for the whole family, and also for the servants, and he cannot allow a stranger to work in the kitchen. Chef Sanho asks if Rushel understood the reason for the refusal. Rushel emotionally shouts that he understands everything, but he assures the chef that he will not cause any inconvenience to those around him. Besides, he has already brought all the necessary ingredients himself. Rushel begs the chef to allow him to use the kitchen. Suddenly, another person appeared in the kitchen and also asked Sanho for permission to use the kitchen. It was Mrs. Lilith. She folded her hands in a pleading gesture and looked at Sanho with concern. Suddenly, Lilith can't stand it anymore and rushes to Chef Sanho. She begs him to let Rushel use the kitchen, her face full of despair. Sanho is surprised by her outburst. Lilith looks expectantly straight at the elderly chef Sanko. It is obvious that this is important to her. Sanko looks back at the young mistress Lilith in surprise. Finally, Sanho chuckled thoughtfully. He was surprised, because usually reserved Mrs. Lilith does not behave so emotionally. Lilith looks at Rushel with hope, but Chef Sanho glanced sideways at Rushel. He wants to say something else. Frowning, Sanho informs the children that he is in charge of this kitchen and is responsible for it. He asks Rushel what exactly he wants to do in the kitchen, and if it can't be left to the chef. Rushel reports that Sanho may be aware that in order to lift the curse on Lady Sophini, it was decided to send Mr. Karim and the knights to the dragon. They are about to set out on the campaign. Rushel shouts that he wants to ensure the victory of the Retivia family in this campaign, and to do so he wants to prepare a special dish. Rushel's face expresses determination and willingness to help. The elderly chef Songko mumbles thoughtfully and rubs his chin. He heard about Rushel's situation, but he still can't just agree, so he's going to make a condition. First, Chef Sanhu demands that Rushel prepare this special dish for him, and then he will decide whether it can be sent to the young master and his knights. He asks if Rushel agrees to this. Inspired, Rushel clenches his fist and loudly agrees that he will do everything on his own and fulfill the condition of the capricious boss Sanko. Chef Sanyo commands the elf cook to bring all the necessary utensils and an apron. The cook obeys. Rushel watches the chef's actions. A view of the beautiful kitchen utensils. There are plates, bowls, and saucers. And also spatulas, a cutting board, and real knives. Rushel looks at the brought utensils with his mouth open in admiration. He has already forgotten when he saw them last. Rushel takes the knife in his hands. He is ready to work. Rushel, demonstrating remarkable skill, skillfully copes with the ingredients brought. He carefully peels and chops vegetables evenly. The sharp knife seems to fly in his hands. Rushel's face is focused on cooking. The cooks, along with the elderly chef Sanko, stand to the side and watch Rushel work, who does not stop cooking. The elf chef is shocked and says that this kid is incredible. Chef Sanko chuckles contentedly. The human chef looks at Rushel with fascination. He still doesn't understand what exactly Rushel is going to cook. The ingredients are familiar to both chefs. These are simple vegetables, meat, and also something that looks like beans. Chef Songho watches the work thoughtfully. Rushel, meanwhile, is absorbed in preparing the food, deftly cutting the ingredients, placing them in a deep bowl, and pouring water into them. Rushel quickly and confidently lights a fire in the stove, puts a frying pan on the fire, and heats up the oil in it, then adds finely chopped garlic. Young Mrs. Lilith watches Rushel at work in admiration. She clenches her fists as if mentally helping him cook. Her face is flushed. She also likes how delicious it smells. Meanwhile, Rushel continues. He adds chopped meat and onion to the aromatic garlic. Skillfully shaking the pan, he fries them. Then he reduces the heat and adds water, bringing it all to a boil. Next, Rushel smiles and adds some dried granules for a tasty broth, as well as salt, pepper, and butter to taste. She adds crumbled cheese on top and lets it melt. And finally, Rushel happily announces that the dish is ready. He has prepared pork with beans and cheese. He puts a portion on a plate and serves it to the chef to try. The dish looks great. Chef Sanho and his cooks look at Rushel's finished dish in silent admiration. Even young lady Lilith thinks that it looks very delicious. Her face lights up with joy. Rushel places a plate with a sample portion on the table in front of Chef Siongo and offers him a helping hand. The chef agrees to take a sample while the others wait for his assessment. Chef Songo carefully puts a spoonful of the dish that Rushel prepared into a small bowl. He slowly tastes it and analyzes the taste. Sonko's face slightly lit up with pleasure. It seems that he likes it. The elderly chef Sonko asks Rushel if the other two chefs can try this wonderful dish. Rushel happily agrees, and the chefs are surprised. Chef Sanyo tells his chefs to try the food that Rushel has prepared. It seems that they don't need much convincing, as both are ready to try the new dish. The cooks also put a little of the new dish in their sockets and carefully try it. And suddenly, they are shocked by how delicious the dish Rushel has prepared for them to try is. Their faces light up with a smile. The elf chef found the dish to be a good combination of sour and sweet, with the meat perfectly salted and flavorful. The human chef noted the crispy onions, crispy potatoes, and fresh beans. He also liked the texture of the ingredients and how they fit together perfectly. However, both chefs find it difficult to say what kind of broth Rushel used to prepare his dish. This broth has a very rich taste. Then the elderly chef Sonko tells them that the broth is seasoned with dried vegetables, and he asks Rushel if this is true. Rushel is surprised. Rushel happily agrees with Chef Sonko. He did add dried vegetables to the dish. Rushel is amazed at how quickly Chef Sonko realized this, since he only tried a little bit. Chef Sonko, as usual, lectures that drying vegetables enhances their flavor and removes excess moisture. It is also very nutritious and healthy. Rushel silently looks at Chef Sonko. The chef has noticed this. Suddenly, Chief Sonko pats Rushel on the shoulder with all his heart, smiling and saying that he is a true master. Rushel did not expect such an emotional display from the chief and is very surprised. Chef Sonko says seriously that now he understands what skills Rushel has, because the taste of the dish was impeccable. Chef gives Rushel permission to feed whoever he wants. Rushel beams with joy and thanks Chef Sonko. However, Chef Sonko adds that Rushel used some special beans in the dish, but he thinks they won't cause any harm. Rushel is delighted and surprised that Chef Sonko even noticed. At this point, Chef Sonko remembered something. Looking at the plate with the remains of the dish that Rushel had prepared, Chef Sonko said that the last time his grandmother cooked such a dish for him was when he was a child, and he didn't expect to ever try it again. Chef Sonho, Rushel, and the cooks are standing around the table. The other cooks are surprised and ask the chef what kind of dish it is, since it's their first time eating it. Rushel is surprised that the cooks have not tried this food. He remembers that this dish was often prepared for him when he lived in the Tristan family mansion. It is probably not a very popular dish now. Chef Sionho continues his sentence by saying that after the war with the demons, a lot of knowledge was lost by humanity. Rushel and the cooks listened to him in surprise. Chef Sanho pointed out that this recipe is one of those lost knowledge. Pork with beans and cheese is now a forgotten dish, and the chef thought that no one would ever make it again. Rushel looks at the chef in surprise. He finally understood the reason for the chef's ignorance, and the chef at this time turns to Rushel. Apparently he wants to say something, but the chef with a small smile on his face tells Rushel that thanks to him and his dish, Chef Silhongo remembered the taste of childhood. Rushel froze for a moment. Rushel is embarrassed and presses his hand to his chest. He did not expect such a violent effect, but he is very glad that he decided to cook this particular dish. The remains of beans with pork are on the table in a bowl, and young Mrs. Lilith, without looking away, looks at the contents of the plate. She seems enchanted. Lilith walked closer to the male chefs and Rushel and coughed. Gathering her courage, she shouted that she wanted to try it too. Looking at the table where Rushel's pork and cheese bean platter was sitting, Chef Sonho feigns sternness and says that it is not appropriate for a young lady to eat the food that was prepared for tasting. Lilith is upset, but she weakly tries to convince Chef Sonho. But suddenly, Chief Sonho winked conspiratorially at Mrs. Lilith, pressing his finger to his lips. He smiles and assures that they will not tell anyone about this. Mrs. Lilith does not understand what Chief Sonho wanted to say at first, but after a moment, she guesses and happily thanks him. Her eyes are shining, and her face is pleased. Rushel politely hands the young mistress a plate of food, asking her to try it. She is pleased. Lilith carefully puts a spoonful of food into her mouth, and suddenly her face lights up with pleasure. It is very delicious. Rushel and Chef Sianho watch her. Chef Sanko said that if the young lady Lilith approved of the taste of this dish, then the others will definitely like it. Rushel, hearing his words, decides to add something. Rushel tells Chef Sianho with a pleasant smile that she wants to cook something else. And if the chef doesn't mind, he will cook a new dish for the chef too. View of a large, beautiful house in a yard with a park. There are round tables on the street with people sitting at them. They're probably celebrating something here. Someone's voice is addressing the knights who will go to the dragon. On closer inspection, it is clear that all the tables are occupied by people and servants are standing a little further away. The tables are covered with tablecloths and richly laden with all kinds of food and drinks. The head of the Retivia family, Clavis, announces that today is the knights' farewell. He wishes them to return victorious and now let them eat, drink, and gain strength. He raises his cup to them. Neatly dressed servants scurry between the tables, carrying plates of food, and people gathered at the tables eat and drink. The clink of glasses is heard. On the tables there is excellent food with vegetables, meat, and gravy. A view of a large table where all the members of the Retivia family are sitting, as well as Flatty, Rushel, Mildy, and Garner. Rushel stands in front of the table and says that although he can help, he has decided to participate in a different way. Rushel has prepared a special dish for everyone and asks everyone present to try it. It is pork with beans and cheese. Clavis, Kareem, and Mrs. Ofini lean forward in anticipation. Clavis thinks that Rushel shouldn't have worked in the kitchen, since he is a guest of the Retivia family. However, Rushel reassures him, saying that he did it of his own free will. His face expresses joy. The head of the seven, Retivia Clavis, puts a spoonful of the dish into his mouth. He pauses for a moment, then lets out an exclamation of admiration. This dish is very exquisite. Madame Sofini confirms what her husband said. Lilith, with a satisfied look, mentally suggests to the others to try it quickly. Rushel looks happy, watching them. Rushel suddenly asks Rushel if there are any special ingredients in this dish. Mildy sits nearby and eats. Rushel smiles and says that the dish he made has gankyo beans in it. Mildy doesn't understand what it is, but Rushel seems quite surprised and even impressed by what Rushel said. Rushel, worried, asks Rushel if these are the beans that strengthen the body and increase its defense. Rushel confirms. It turns out that if you eat these beans, you can survive a dragon's blow. Fletty is amazed that Rushel used such rare and valuable ingredients for his dish. Karim tells Fletty that he expected nothing less from Rushel's cooking. Both look at the smiling Rushel, who has something else in mind. Rushel takes out another bowl of food and places it on the table. He has prepared something else. Rushel yelps in surprise when she sees the contents of the new dish. There are small sticks on the plate that look very unusual. The head of the Retivia family, Clavis, his wife Sofini, Kareem, and young Lilith are very surprised by what Rushel's new dish looks like. None of them know what it is. Not even Kareem and Clavis, who are researchers. Rushel, in order to calm the crowd, said that he had received permission to cook from Chef Sanko himself, but he was still a little skeptical. Clavis was surprised that Chef Sanko himself was involved in this. Rushel finds it difficult to explain the situation more simply, but finally decides to do so. He says that this new dish is a little dangerous. Karim and Clavis are tense, worried that the food could be dangerous. The discussion at the table began. Fletty is sure that Rushel's dish does not look dangerous. Rushel is afraid to try it, and Mildy suggests that perhaps the dish does not taste very good. Rushel reassures them the dish is not poisonous. Fletty is thoughtful. Suddenly, Fletty decisively took one stick from the plate and tried it. The others sitting at the table looked at him in horror and surprise, not understanding how he dared to do this. Fletty calmly chewed his food. Fletty's face lit up with pleasure, because what he had just eaten was very tasty. Mildy and Rushel were even more shocked by what they heard. Fletty repeated once again that Rushel's dish did not look like anything dangerous. Then the head of the Clavis family decides to try it, followed by Karim, Sofini, and Lilith. Rushel's dish is also hesitantly tried by Rushel and Mildy, who decided to close her eyes just in case. And suddenly everyone sitting at the table exclaimed loudly that it was very tasty. Their faces looked very pleased. People smiled at each other and at Rushel, who was standing in front of the table and was glad that he could please them. Mildy, having grabbed a whole bunch of sticks in her hands, laughs loudly and eats them. She says that Rushel only scared her in vain. There is nothing dangerous in this food. Garner eats calmly and is silent. Rushel, Clavis, and Sophony continue to eat the sticks that Rushel prepared with pleasure. Judging by their faces, it is delicious, and they like it. And then Kareem cried out that he simply cannot stop eating them. He is surprised. This food seems to attract him. Fleddy eats silently. He also cannot restrain himself. Fleddy eats silently. He also cannot restrain himself. Then Rushel, seeing their surprise, explains that his new dish is so delicious that none of them will be able to stop. Rushel smiles slyly. The whole company sitting at the table unanimously and loudly confirms what Rushel said. They all hold in their hands these delicious sticks that Rushel prepared, and which turned out to be so delicious. The Retivia family and their entourage continue to eat the dish, praising its taste and rich aroma. They like that the amount of seasoning in the dish is perfect. None of them can't stop eating. Rushel watches with pleasure as the assembled people gobble up his cooking. He seems pleased. Suddenly, Rushel remembered something. What Fleddy asked earlier, what kind of dish they are eating with such appetite now. Rushel triumphantly answers that they are all eating fried dragon butterfly now. Rachel and Mildy, with their mouths full of tasty sticks, ask Rushel in incredible surprise what they heard. Is it really a dragon butterfly? Rushel, remembering the appearance of this creature, describes it to those gathered. It has sharp fangs. It can breathe fire. It is one of the largest insects. Its meat is like fish in texture. Rushel made mincemeat from the meat, and then fried it in the form of sticks. Rushel wanted to add something useful about the butterfly dragon, but his voice was completely drowned out by the crunching sounds coming from the people eating. Rushel laughed to himself, realizing that none of them were listening to him anymore, and now the plates in front of the eaters are empty. Mildy and Rushel are shocked. They really ate all their portions and couldn't stop. It embarrasses them a little, but it was so delicious for them. Rushel states contentedly that this way, everyone who ate the dragon butterfly should now gain skills, such as resistance to dragon attacks and resistance to its breath. Clavis, Kareem, and Fleddy are surprised. Kareem thanks him. Evening. View of part of the Retivia family home. Rushel is walking along the corridors of the house. He is glad that everyone liked the food, and now he is sure that they have every chance for success. Suddenly, Rushel saw someone. It's Fleddy. He's standing on the open veranda overlooking the estate. He's holding a two-handed sword. It's obvious that Fleddy has decided to do some evening training, and beads of sweat have already appeared on his forehead from the effort. Fleddy unleashes a series of lightning-fast attacks, his precise movements seeming to slice through an imaginary enemy. The air around him hums with the tension caused by the movement of his sword, and Fleddy himself is extremely focused. Rushel secretly watches his diligent training. He thinks that Fleddy moves well. Fleddy exhaled tiredly, and then someone called him. It turns out that it is Rushel. She comes closer and asks if the leader wants to lie down and rest, because tomorrow they will all be on their way. Fleddy is a little surprised by her appearance. Fleddy looks at Rushel and says he can't sleep. He continues thoughtfully, saying he's worried. After all, their target is a dragon, and he's not sure if their squad will be of any use. Rushel is surprised and continues to stand quietly to the side and listen. Rushel smiles and reminds Fleddy that Rushel has prepared dishes for them that will help, so everything will be fine. Fleddy agrees. With the food Rushel gave them all, he is going to at least become a shield. Rushel asks again, surprised, if she understood Fleddy correctly. Does he really want to be a shield? Fleddy confidently confirms this. Fleddy is serious, putting his hand on his chest. He tells Rushel that he intends to protect Mr. Karim no matter what. Even if it means giving his life, Fleddy is ready for it. Standing in front of each other, Rushel and Fleddy are silent. Then Rushel asks about the shield again. She suddenly shouts that their opponent will be a dragon. Is Fleddy sure that he can withstand its blow? Fleddy insists that he is ready to die if necessary. Rushel clutches her magic staff nervously. She droops a little but still answers Fleddy confidently. You can't just throw away your life like that. Fleddy stubbornly repeats that he is weak. and that even when they fought the bandits in the forest, they won only thanks to Rushel. Fletty is sure that without Rushel they would not have won then, and that means he will not have enough strength to win the battle with the dragon. Looking at Rushel, Fletty added that unlike them, Mr. Kareem would definitely have the strength to win. Rushel listens in surprise. Fletty added resignedly that with the strength that Rushel gave them, he, Fletty, could at least become a shield for Mr. Kareem. Rushel listened silently, and then Rushel couldn't take it anymore and screamed at Fletty. She asks if Fletty really thinks that Rushel gave them all the strength so that they would die. Her emotions surprised not only Fletty, but also the hiding Rushel, who was still listening to the conversation. Rushel whirled around. She thought Fletty was being too self-deprecating, and she was sure Fletty didn't understand. Rushel stood with her back to Fletty, who was stunned into silence. Rushel's face sank. She quietly whispers that if Fletty dies, then all the other members of the team will be very sad. Rushel and Fletty remain silent. Rushel continues to listen to their conversation, slightly peeking out from around the corner. Rushel is very excited. He is mentally panicking, not knowing what to do now. From excitement, he even slightly pressed the edge of the wall from behind, which he was looking at with his fingers. Suddenly, someone grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. Rushel is shocked. It is the head of the Retivia Clavis family. He asks Rushel to be quiet and not to break the walls. Rushel apologizes. Rushel whispers and asks if Mr. Clavis saw what just happened. He answers affirmatively, saying that he was just passing by chance. Rushel is upset. Is it because of his food that Rushel and Fletty quarreled? If so, he thinks he should be held responsible for it. Clavis reassures him. He thinks that it is not like that at all. Clavis explained to the upset Rushel that Fletty has a very strong sense of duty, but at the same time he does not value his life at all. Clavis confidently says that in fact this is Fletty's own problem, and Clavis's task as his master is to ease the burden that Fletty carries on his shoulders. Rushel is still upset. He got to the Retivia family house only thanks to Fletty, so he does not want Fletty to die on the campaign. Clavis put his hand on the shoulder of the upset Rushel. Clavis leaned towards Rushel and looking him straight in the eyes, says that he also does not want Fletty to die. Clavis asks Rushel to rely on him. Rushel looks at Clavis in surprise. It seems that he was struck by the master's speech, a view of the luxurious home of the Retivia family with many windows. A large group of knights in full armor kneel and wait. The action moves to the hall, where the Retivia family is located on the platform. The head of the Clavis family speaks, addressing the knights of the Retivia family, who have decided to challenge the dragon to lift the curse from the wife of Lord Clavis. The knights listen to the speech. The head of the Clavis family speaks loudly and confidently, saying that he is proud of his knight's courage and loyalty. In front of him, in the first row, are Garner, Mildy, Fletty, and Rushel. On the platform are Mrs. Safini, Lilith, and Rushel. On the platform are Mrs. Safini, Lilith, and Rushel. Everyone listens to the head's speech. The eldest son of the Retivia family, Harem, stepped forward and beckoned to the knight captain Fletty. Fletty immediately obeyed, and as he approached, he again knelt before the members of the Retivia family and the head, Lord Clavis. Clavis looks at Fletty, who's standing in front of him in a bow. For a moment, he addresses him by name and suddenly hands him something, which greatly surprises Fletty, who raises his head. The head of the Retivia family, Clavis, sits in a chair that resembles a throne and confidently hands Fletty a sword in a rich sheath. He looks straight at Fletty and wants Fletty to take this sword with him to fight the dragon. Fletty and the rest of the knights close to him are in shock. They are all very surprised by the action of their master, because this sword is a sacred relic, because this sword is the language of flame. Suddenly, Rushel remembered the bandit in the cave, with whom he fought in the forest when he helped the knights. He is absolutely sure that this is the same sword. Fletty pulled himself together. Overcoming his excitement, he accepts the most valuable gift from Mr. Clavis. He is grateful to the master for it, and swears that he will lift the curse from Mr. Safini's wife, even if he has to give his life for it. However, Mr. Clavis clearly wanted to hear something else. He asks Fletty again about his life, and adds that since he, Clavis, gave Fletty this priceless sword, does Fletty understand the meaning of this? Fletty is sure that he does. And again, Mr. Clavis says that again Fletty didn't understand anything. Fletty raised his head in surprise and looked at Mr. Clavis in confusion. Looking straight into the eyes of the surprised Fletty, the head of the Retivia family, Clavis clearly says that he wants Fletty to return alive and personally give him this sword. Fletty is amazed. Suddenly, a voice from the side calls Fletty and Kareem by name. They turn around at the sound, as does Clavis. It is probably the voice of Mrs. Safini. Standing up from her chair, she thanks them for fighting for her. But she doesn't want Fletty and Kareem to feel like they owe her anything. Standing near the men, she asks them to come home alive. Kareem smiles in agreement, and Fletty seems surprised again. Then Mr. Clavis, looking at Fletty, asks again if Fletty has understood what he and Mrs. Safini want from him. Fletty lowered his head, tears welling up in his eyes. He formed a fist with his gauntleted hand and slammed it loudly on the floor, causing surprise in Mr. Clavis, who was sitting in front of him. Raising his head sharply, he confidently declared that he, Fletty Heimrud, and he swear that they will all return alive and that he will definitely return Lord Clavis's sacred relic. Fletty finally understood everything. The head of the Clavis family jumped up from his chair. He thought it was a great speech. He loudly proclaimed that he wished for the entire party to be blessed by the Holy Spirit Liamel. Suddenly the whole hall is filled with a deafening roar of knights, who thus express agreement with the words of their master. Clavis stands on the platform with his arms outstretched in honor of respect. Kareem and Fletty stand nearby. Suddenly, in all the noise, Clavis caught a movement out of the corner of his eye. It was Rushel, who was looking in his direction. Clavis smiled at Rushel. Rushel mentally admired the behavior of the head of the Retivia family. The action moves to the street. A detachment of knights led by Fletty is preparing to set out, equipping horses. Fletty apologizes to Rushel for yesterday's incident. He said too much. Rushel was a little surprised. Fletty, holding the sword he received from Lord Clavis, he's not going to throw his life away, and he hopes Rushel won't turn her back on him. Rushel smiles and says she won't abandon him. Kareem, sitting on his horse, asks intently if everyone is ready for the campaign. He commands the departure of the detachment to the northern mountains, where the dragon lives. Fletty and Kareem are riding at the head of the Retivian knights. The entire squad has set out. Behind them are their knights. Among them, Mildy, Rushel, and Garner. The Retivian knights look very impressive and stern, a view of many horses walking. Apparently, this is a squad of Retivian knights crossing different terrains on their way. There is grass, a river, and even rocky paths through which they carefully make their way. Suddenly, a horse's hoof clicked loudly, and Kareem and Fletty, riding ahead of the Retivian knights, looked up, both of them noticing something unusual. In front of them is a view of a mountain. This is the mountain where the dragon lives. It is very high and surrounded by forest and hills. The squad of knights and the accompanying carriages stop, amazed by the beauty and grandeur of the mountain. Kareem gives Fletty the order to set up camp. They will spend the night here today and set out on foot tomorrow, so all the knights must be well rested. Fletty understands. Evening. The forest is darkened and the mountain looks ominous against it. The knights of Retivia have set up camp, lit fires, and are now resting, preparing for tomorrow's climb into the mountains. Some are eating, some are talking. Kareem is standing by a tree near the camp where his knights are resting. He is looking thoughtfully at something in his hands. It is a leaf of some plant. Kareem remembers Lilith. His face is worried. Kareem remembers his sister Lilith's sweet face, and how on the day of leaving for the campaign she gave him some medicinal herbs in a bag. He was very grateful to her. He remembers that Lilith said something else. Kareem remembered that little Lilith had given him a pressed leaf of the rulala grass as a farewell gift, and this unusual grass is capable of fulfilling people's wishes. She then wished for the mother's curse to be lifted and for Kareem to return home alive. Kareem holds a leaf of the rulala herb in his hands and remembers that Lilith asked him to be more careful. He anxiously thinks that if only she would wait for him. Morning. View of the mountain and the lightened forest. The detachment of the Knights of Retivia has broken camp and is ready to set out. Kareem commands the march. He suggests moving according to the map given to them by Rushel. Fletty agrees. They are ready. Fletty has pulled out a leaf from a large plant, holding it in both hands. Kareem asks uncertainly if it is a map. Fletty says that Rushel told him to open the package with the leaf when they reached the Dragon Mountain. Fletty is still holding the leaf. Suddenly, the sheet in Fletty's hands gave off a huge puff of steam, from which a small silhouette of a man similar to Rushel jumped out. Kareem and Fletty were incredibly surprised. No one expected such a violent effect. Rushel in the club, the couple recognized Rushel and screamed in surprise. Kareem and Fletty silently and shockedly looked at the silhouette. Both fell into a slight stupor, and Mildy did not understand at all what was happening. Rushel, who appeared in the clouds of steam from the leaf, apologizes for scaring everyone. He explains that what they see is the action of the possessed grass with a part of his soul. Rushel is shocked. She asks if it is the very rare herb, which is even rarer than the other magical herb. Rushel confirms Rushel is right from the steam. Mildy watches with her mouth open. Rushel is still in shock, because this figure of steam can even talk. Mildy suggests that Rushel is using the skill to communicate with them from afar. But the figure of steam denies this option. Karim and Fletty are still standing silently. A small figure of Rushel made of steam explains to the assembled that he is merely an alter ego, based on the memories and character of the living Rushel. If the main body had been here, the dragon would have definitely sensed it, so they had to improvise. Karim finally spoke, and he was once again amazed by Rushel's skills, although he expected no less from Rushel. Rushel fell silent in surprise from the steam, and then Rushel from the steam suddenly became embarrassed. He was very flattered by such attention and high praise. Karim and Fletty were amazed again and looked at the laughing figure of Rushel from the steam. Rushel from steam instructively tells that dragons are constantly moving, and the knights need to find him somehow. Therefore, simple cards are useless, and in the form of a figure from steam it will be easier for him to direct them all. The steam Rushel sheepishly reminds the assembled that he is only a part of the real Rushel's soul, so he can only give simple advice. However, he believes that he will be very useful if they rely on him. Karim calls Fletty in a whisper. He understands. This Rushel of steam is very loud. It chatters constantly and looms in front of the gases. Fletty agrees with Karim. It is indeed a very noisy substance. Rushel flies forward from the steam, leading all the other knights and their leaders. The entire company sets out on foot, as Karim had originally planned. Rushel commands everyone to move forward, toward the dragon. The knights of Retivia climb the mountains in a group, following behind the steam figure of Rushel. Fletty goes in front, followed by Karim, Mildy, Garner, Rushel, and the rest. The climb up the mountain is quite steep. A view of the mountain ranges, among which a line of Retivian knights can be seen walking towards the dragon. In front, as before, is Fletty, carrying a sheet of map with the figure of Rushel and Karim as the leader of the expedition. It seems that those walking in front saw something. The group of people walking came out into the open, and a beautiful view of the mountains appeared before their eyes, as well as a small piece of a tail from some huge beast. Karim, Fletty with Rushel and Mildy froze in surprise. This view was so impressive. What met their eyes was none other than a dragon, a huge and majestic beast, sleeping in the middle of a clearing hidden among the mountains. It lay with its paws tucked under it and its large leathery wings folded. It was a stunning sight. Standing on a small elevation, the squad had a good view of the dragon. Karim recognized it. This is the white dragon, namely, the dragon-serving god. All his companions froze in reverent admiration and looked down at the dragon. Steam Rushel says that his powers are over at this point, so he wishes them luck. Karim thanks the figure for its help, but Steam Rushel remembered something else important. Rushel asks not to tell the dragon his name, because if he hears it, something terrible could happen. The figure said goodbye and disappeared inside the leaf that Fletty had been carrying all this time. Karim again wonders what Rushel did to this dragon. A view of a huge dragon sleeping on the ground. A group of knights stand right in front of it. They are Karim, Fletty, Rushel, and Grainer. Mildy stepped forward a little and slightly crouched in front of the dragon's face, as if examining it. Mildy turned to Karim and whispered that the dragon was fast asleep and that this was their chance. Karim looked at the dragon seriously. He thought that was not true. Karim, with a furrowed brow, tells Mildy that such a sneak attack is cowardly and that they cannot show him strength in this way. They must challenge the white dragon openly, face to face. Rushel, Kareem, and Garner silently agree with their master's words. Their faces are serious, and they clearly think the same as he does. Mildy forgot herself and began to squeal too loudly about how serious they all looked. The dragon moved. The dragon's huge leathery wings instantly blocked out the sunlight, casting the entire group in shadow. Kareem, Rushel, Fletty, and Garner stare in shock as the dragon rises. Mildy, not seeing it yet. Then Mildy realized that something was wrong and turned around, seeing a paw with huge claws in front of her. She squealed again, unable to contain her emotions. The dragon suddenly said that it was too noisy here. A huge white dragon appeared before them, furiously asking who they were and how they dared to interrupt his sleep. Kareem and his soup cooks were taken aback by the dragon's anger, and a gust of powerful wind swept across the clearing from the movement of his wings. Here the dragon looked a little further than those who stood at his paws. He chuckled. The white dragon saw a large detachment of knights and archers, ready for battle, who stood a little further away, waiting for the signal of the master. Apparently, the dragon understood everything. The white dragon looks again at those who stand at his paws and states that this whole company did not end up in this place by chance. Karem, Rushel, and Fletty are full of determination, but Mildy is still in shock from what she saw. Kareem, as the leader of the expedition and the heir of the Retivia family, addressed him directly, looking straight into the eyes of the white dragon. Kareem said that they had come to ask for help in lifting the dragon's curse. He was asking the dragon for help. The dragon chuckled thoughtfully. He looks at Kareem intently and asks if Kareem knows what he needs to do for this. Kareem, frowning, looks at the dragon silently. Kareem and Fletty are ready for battle. They have their weapons in hand and are in fighting positions. Kareem firmly tells the dragon that they are ready. Mildy draws her bowstring and complains about why they couldn't have struck the dragon in the back. Rushel furiously replies that they already explained to Mildy why they couldn't have done that. Garner simply prepares for battle in silence. The squad of Knights of Retivia, led by Kareem, Fletty, Garner, Rushel, and Mildy, are ready to fight the dragon. They look confident and formidable and want to show the dragon their strength. The dragon is pleased with the sight he has seen. He too is ready for battle and invites the knights to show him all their determination. The white dragon rushes to attack the knights who are waiting for his attack. Kareem and Fletty, fully armed and armed, rush forward. Kareem commands the start of the battle. Fletty supports. Both leaders look determined and maintain the fighting spirit in their warriors. The Knights of Retivia attack, each of them attacking the dragon with their own weapon. The archers shoot when ready, and the foot knights go into close combat with spears and swords. The dragon, with its wings spread, awaits a new wave of attack from the knights. Noise and clouds of dust, raised by the movement of the dragon's wings and the knights' feet, spread across the clearing. The dragon seems very pleased with what is happening. He looks at the knights going to attack and roars happily. He thinks that this is a great strategy, without tricks, and he likes it very much. The battle has begun. Arrows are flying at the dragon, and the foot knights are pressing from below. The white dragon roars. They are unlikely to harm him, but nevertheless. Garner loudly commands his squad to raise their shields. The knights obey. And they build a whole wall of high shields, behind which are the rest of the group, including Rushel. The white dragon roars deafeningly across the battlefield, instilling fear in the knights not only by its appearance, but also by its sound. The dragon's wings send a powerful stream of wind towards Garner and his knights, capable of destroying everything in its path. He roars. The dragon's roar strike is so strong that even people sitting behind shields cannot resist it. Rushel covers herself with her hands, and Mildy cowers in the cold and screams that she should have dressed warmer. The dragon continues to direct his roaring blows at them, and loudly asks how long they can withstand his monstrous breath. The knights behind the shields are still holding their formation and holding on. Suddenly, Fletty appeared above the dragon's head. He didn't just jump out, but was ready to strike at the enemy. He raised his sword to attack. But the white dragon is not so easily fooled. He considers Fletty naive and easily repels his attack with just one turn of his powerful head. Fletty winced from the blow, but managed to land successfully on the ground nearby. The dragon looks at Fletty and asks if Fletty really thought he, a dragon, would let his guard down if he was distracted by the knights behind the shields. He adds that his comrades have already turned to ice from his breath. Then large fireballs flew at the dragon from the side. It looks like one of the knights directed magic against the dragon. The white dragon roars from the balls hitting him. He did not expect a blow in the back, and therefore looked back, looking for the source of the magical attack. But behind him are the same knights behind the wall of shields. It turned out that behind the wall of shields there were not just knights, but a whole squad of magicians. At the head of the squad of magicians is Rushel. It was she who gave them the command to shoot magic balls at the dragon. And they are ready to strike again. The dragon is surprised how it is that the people who are hit by his breath are still able to move. He thinks it is impossible. Rushel shouts to her squad of mages to prepare for the attack. They all raised their magic staffs and prepared to shoot at the dragon again. The dragon suddenly rose into the air and decided to attack the knights hiding behind the shield wall from the air. But then grappling hooks rose from the ground and caught on the dragon's wings, preventing it from taking off. The dragon was surprised. The dragon does not give up so easily. He flaps his huge wings and tries to rise into the air. At this time, several people, including Mildy, try to climb the ropes with which other people hold the dragon. Mildy runs up the rope and screams that the dragon can't escape. On the ground, several groups of knights continue to hold the ropes so that the dragon can't escape. Finally, the fastest ones who were able to run up the ropes in jumps try to jump on the dragon. At this time, he calls them annoying and drives them away like flies, trying to throw the knights off himself with sharp movements. But several people, including Mildy, manage to cling to the dragon's skin and are now on its paws and body. Mildy screams and asks if they are all ready. The knights answer in the affirmative, and then Mildy prepares to give another order. Mildy suddenly commands her knights to let go of the dragon. Then she and the others quickly jump off the dragon. The dragon is very surprised, because they put so much effort into climbing on him. And then the dragon noticed that something was sticking out between the scales of his body. He looked closely and discovered that these were some cylinders with a fuse. The dragon realized that it was explosives, and an explosion thundered into the same world and a bright light flared up. The dragon screamed terribly in pain, deafening everyone who was nearby, including Mildy and the knights who were still falling to the ground, who covered their ears with their hands. Karim is waiting for the falling people below. He threw his sword up and used the wind skill, which caught the falling knights and Mildy. Strong wind clubs enveloped the people and smoothly lowered them to the ground. They were not hurt. Karim praises Mildy and her group, calling them well done. Mildy is in her element and joyfully shouts, thanking Karim for the praise. The other knights silently bow to Mr. Karim. Mildy is in a belligerent mood, and after what happened, she confidently says that their attack should have reached the dragon. Rushel, Karim, and Fleddy are standing nearby. But suddenly Mildy and the others see the outline of the white dragon through the smoke from the explosion. The dragon is still alive, of course, but now they have made him angry. There are clouds of dust and smoke around the dragon, and in this form he has become even more dangerous. He thinks that people need to be shown why they should be afraid of the divine dragon. His eyes are shining. The dragon got angry. He hits the knights with his clawed paws, which are taller than a man, and adds blows with his long, powerful tail. The knights fly apart like splinters, and the dragon's breath is ready to freeze everyone. The dragon continues to attack the knights, showing its terrible beauty and power. Its wings are incredibly large in size. The knights are like dolls in front of it, and they do not know how else to approach such an opponent. Rushel holds back the dragon's breath attacks with her magic staff, protecting the knights behind her. She is having a hard time holding back the dragon's power. Rushel thinks about how great the dragon's power is, and that if they didn't have the increased resistance to the dragon's breath, they all would have lost this fight with the dragon long ago. The dragon stands with his paws wide apart and his wings spread out, surrounded by knights. And he is slightly surprised by the fact that they have held out against him and his breath for so long. He even praises the humans for being so well prepared. The dragon hit the ground with his paw. He adds that humans will never compare anyway. The dragon attacks again, throwing the knights who come at him like kittens. The dragon doesn't care what kind of weapon they have. He throws them all. Rushel can't stand the onslaught and suddenly screams, dropping her staff. She's thrown high up by the blow and, unconscious, begins to fall down. Rushel is caught in midair by Fleddy, who catches her and carries her gently a little further. He lowers her to the ground and asks if she is okay. Rushel is surprised. Fletty asks her not to overexert herself. And stands up, preparing to fight again. Fletty left Rushel to rest and, looking back slightly, reminded her that they still had protective magic and that they all had to return alive. Rushel was determined, and she agreed with Fletty. The dragon is still surrounded by the Knights of Retivia, who do not stop trying to get it with their weapons. It seems that it is not difficult for him at all. Fletty rushes to help his people, holding his sword at the ready. Fletty lets out a battle cry, and with a wide swing of his sword, strikes the dragon's hide. The dragon sees him, but chuckles thoughtfully. He considers Fletty's blow too weak, but looks at him carefully. Fletty is amazed that he couldn't even scratch the dragon's skin, even though he had received a damage boost to dragons from Rushel's food. The other knights have a moment's respite and stand nearby. Suddenly, someone shouts for Fletty not to lose heart, and then the dragon is attacked again. It is Harem. He suddenly came to Fletty's aid. He also struck the dragon with his sword, and it seems he hit the dragon. The dragon suddenly screams that it hurts. The tip of its tail twitches slightly, and tears even appear in its eyes. Kareem touched the dragon's neck, and it could not hold back its scream. Fletty calls Kareem, and he says that it seems that their attacks on the dragon are working, and he himself is just putting on a brave face in front of people. Despite all his power and strength, the knights around froze, waiting to see what will happen. However, Kareem understands that this is a battle of attrition, and that the long-term outlook for all of them is very bad, because the people here are not in the best position. Fletty understood what Kareem meant. Fletty made a decision in a flash. He shouts to Kareem that he will distract the dragon. Kareem will have to strike. Kareem agrees. He understands what Fletty has planned, and relies on him. Kareem concentrates and calls on the spirits of the wind to become even stronger. Fletty attacks the dragon by distracting him, but he knows that his sword Flame Tongue is a magic sword. But Fletty's magic power is clearly not enough to unlock the sword's potential. It seems there is only one way out. Then Fletty decides that he will attack the old-fashioned way and slash at the dragon, and Fletty immediately does so. The dragon notices Fletty, and his attempts to attack. He seems to be an annoying person. The dragon is annoyed. With one blow of his tail, he sends Fletty flying away from him. But Fletty seemed to be prepared for such a blow. He deftly uses the power of the sword and creates a vortex around himself, which successfully slows him down and allows him to land without damage. Fletty is right in front of the dragon. He sees its huge body and head, which is ready to spew out dragon breath. Fletty is worried, because if the dragon hits him from such a distance, Fletty is finished. However, suddenly, the dragon spews out its breath. Not Fletty at all. Someone hit him, and the dragon missed. He looks in annoyance at the one who hit him. It is Kareem again, who has risen into the air and is ready to hit again. The dragon is annoyed. Kareem, who has called upon the wind spirits to help him, hovers in the air and swings his sword with ease, as if he controls the wind and air. The dragon is very surprised, because this magic is familiar to him. He realized that Kareem is one of those who talk to the wind spirits. He asks if this is true. Kareem, continuing to float lightly in the air, confirms this. Yes, he, the hero, Kareem, appeared before the dragon. Kareem uses his powers and delivers a powerful blow to the dragon right in the air, reinforced by wind skills. The dragon watches him closely. The dragon sees Kareem moving around his huge body with lightning speed and striking with his sword. The dragon growls in pain and disappointment. Kareem, looking at the dragon, decides that perhaps it is time to finish. With the help of his powers, Kareem flies even higher. On the ground, small figures of people and a dragon are visible, watching Kareem. And from this height, Kareem with a scream strikes the dragon with all his might. The force of Kareem's blow is great, as if he makes the wind and air attack the dragon. Kareem's blow reached its target and hit the dragon, so much so that it almost fell. Swirls of air and force are visible around. The dragon looks at Kareem, reminding him of an annoying insect. Then the dragon lets out another dragon roar, aiming it at Kareem, who is hovering above. But he deftly dodges it, using his powers of speaking to the spirits of the wind. And so they came face to face. On one side, Kareem, on the other, the white divine Darkon. Both were shouting war cries and were determined to win. The dragon attacks with a dragon roar, and Kareem uses the powers of the wind and strikes the dragon from different sides with lightning speed. Below are the knights of Retivia, who watch this battle. Fletty, who is also below among the knights, commands that it is necessary to support Lord Kareem, and the knights rush forward. A crowd of attackers rushes towards the dragon on the ground, and Kareem attacks him in the air. It seems that he will not be able to hold on. But the dragon only roars deafeningly, calling them pathetic little people. Mildy and a group of archers shoot at the dragon. Rushel and her group of mages hit the dragon with magic, and Garner and his knights continue to hold the shield wall. Everyone is having a hard time. Evening has come. Mildy, Rushel, and Garner, like the rest of the knights of Retivia, are exhausted and can barely stand on their feet. This battle is not easy for anyone. Fletty is also tired. The knights around him can barely stand. Fletty calls for Mr. Kareem, but he is also exhausted and breathing heavily. Looking ahead, the white dragon stands above Kareem, who sits powerlessly on the ground. His impressive winged figure looks majestic and terrifying against the background of the moon's disk. The dragon laughs. He praises the humans for being able to hurt him so badly, but Kareem is already wounded, as are his men. The dragon looks down at Kareem. He knows that none of them can continue the fight. Kareem breathes heavily and looks at the dragon. It continues to speak. It is just a little tired, and now it is all over for the people. The dragon swung its paw. It wants to strike. Kareem tensed and prepared. Seizing the moment, Kareem jumped back from the dragon's deadly paw, which caused the dragon new surprise. He didn't think that Kareem could still move. This is the last chance. Kareem lands and immediately calls upon the power of the wind, raising his hand with the sword. Kareem mentally asks for help from someone and closely watches what is happening. The dragon chuckles loudly. He is triumphant. But at the same time, he praises Kareem for his persistence in the fight. The dragon waits to see what will happen, because after Kareem's blow, nothing happened. He looks at Kareem raising his sword, but there was no blow. Suddenly, the dragon can't stand it anymore and starts laughing. Quietly at first, but his laughter grows louder and louder. He asks Kareem if he's going to continue or if he's out of magic power. Kareem is tired, but he does not agree with the dragon and his conclusions about his condition. Kareem believes that everything went according to plan. Suddenly, Fletty jumped out, and from the height of the jump, he swings his sword, preparing to strike. Fletty screams, wants to put all his strength. Fletty screams, wants to put all his strength into one blow. The dragon can't believe his eyes. He's sure it's impossible. So was Kareem's entire attack originally something else? Sword Fletty began to change. He suddenly became as if engulfed in flames. Then the flames disappeared and the appearance of the sword changed, as did its color. And Fletty is ready to strike the dragon with this renewed sword. The dragon tensed up when he saw the sword. Kareem also noticed the changes in the sword. He realized that Fletty had probably heard the sword. Rushel and Mildy were also nearby, shouting encouragingly, wanting to support Fletty. Fletty's sword began to glow again. Fletty's sword began to glow again, but in a completely different way, and Fletty himself made a scary face and let out a battle cry, aiming straight at the dragon. The dragon now also sees Fletty's attack and sees his unusual sword. But he didn't have time to dodge. Fletty's blow reached its target, and the dragon screams terribly, having received a blow from the magic sword.